And thank you for joining us here. Get the camera redirected while I got the shot of this. But it's been a busy weekend. We were out at the Oregon Medical Marijuana Business Conference this weekend here at the Hilton in Portland, Oregon. There was a lot of great speakers, great events happening there. And we will be bringing you the highlights of that coming up on the Russ Belville Show. And stay tuned for that because we've got my presentation at the media panel. That'll come up in the Radical Rant segment at the end of the show. And then in hour two, going to bring you the two keynote speeches. You'll hear a short keynote speech from my congressman, Earl Blumenauer, followed by a longer keynote speech by Judge Jim Gray, the LEAP speaker and former vice presidential candidate for the Libertarian Party. That's coming up in hour two, so stay tuned for that. Also on the show today, we're going to go behind the headlines and take a look at why we don't have a cannabis cup in the Pacific Northwest. All sorts of updates from High Times as to some of the other places they're able to have a cannabis cup, but not Portland, Oregon, or Seattle, Washington. We'll tell you why coming up in Behind the Headlines. Also on the show today, in drug war data mining, last Friday was a hell of a day. It was as if the prohibitionists were trying to get as much anti-marijuana rhetoric in over the weekend based on the National Survey on Drug Use and Health numbers that came out. I caught Project Sam in a massive gaffe on one of their press releases, so bad they were forced to retract the press release and retitle it. We'll tell you all about that in our drug war data mines. Also today, it's Monday. That means we get our regular dose of cannabis science with Dr. Mitch Earlywine. You can call in toll free at 844-207-2346. That's coming up at 1:30. Get your live questions ready in our chat room or call in and ask Dr. Mitch about cannabis science, culture, history, and health. But everything starts off with the 420 radio news, and in the news headlines today, we've got a Democratic presidential candidate who is openly courting the marijuana movement. We'll tell you who it is. We've also got the new regulations passed, finally, for statewide medical marijuana regulation in the state of California. It's got some activists very concerned. Washington state could be looking at more retail pot shops thanks to new changes in the law that will move medical dispensaries, many of them, into the recreational market. We've got Florida looking at not one but two opportunities to legalize marijuana, not just for medical use. We'll tell you about one of them coming up here. And we'll also look at Boston, Massachusetts, where a medical marijuana convention drew thousands over the weekend. You're listening to the Russ Belville Show from beautiful legal Potland, Oregon. We're back with the news right after this.
You're tuned into the Russ Belville Show, the voice of the marijuana nation.
Hey, it's Herb Thrasher, and this is 420radio.org.
As a police officer, I walked the beat, served on the Vice Squad and SWAT team, and became an expert on drug addiction. I saw firsthand the effects of Ohio's destructive marijuana laws. Simply put, they don't work. Ohio spends over $100 million each year on this failed effort. It's time for marijuana reform, so law enforcement can spend their time cracking down on real criminals and making Ohio a safer place for our families. Vote yes on 3.
Marijuana may be legal in some states, but it is still very difficult to advertise. Legal marijuana states have strict guidelines about where marijuana ads may be placed. 420 Radio provides advertisers a marijuana-related on-demand platform skewed toward older adults that meets Colorado and other legal states' advertising restrictions. Visit 420radio.org/advertise to learn how you can place web ads that are immune to ad block software and audio ads heard live on 420 Radio and stored permanently in the enormously popular Russ Belville Show podcast. 420 Radio is heard by legions of dedicated fans who make up the activist leadership and entrepreneurial base of serious marijuana law reformers. Our audience is older, better educated, and more financially secure than most marijuana-related media can boast. Learn more at 420radio.org/advertise. Imagine life without taxes. Let New Era Certified Public Accountants, NewEraCPAs.com, handle your Cannabis 280E and tax strategy. Get your business prepared with New Era CPA's Cannabis Finance Bootcamp. NewEraCPAs.com, with years of experience in the industry, we are one of the nation's leading accounting firms for growers, dispensaries, and ancillary companies from Washington to California. NewEraCPAs.com. It's time for the 420 Radio News, covering the latest headlines in consumer cannabis, medical marijuana, and industrial hemp. Replays of 420 Radio News are embeddable and shareable from our SoundCloud page at soundcloud.com/RadicalRuss. Now, the marijuana headlines in 4 minutes and 20 seconds. This is your 420 Radio News for Monday, September 14th, 2015. Democratic presidential candidate Martin O'Malley touts his progressive cannabis law reform history in a press release announcing a marijuana legalization listening session in Denver, Colorado this Thursday. The event will be held at the office of Vicente Cederberg, a law firm that has been instrumental in legalizing and regulating cannabis in Colorado. The former Maryland governor has had a difficult time capturing the liberal Democratic primary base, as Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders has captured the hearts of progressive voters, including many cannabis law reform advocates, with his positive drug war reform statements and policy proposals. Frontrunner Hillary Clinton has locked up the establishment Democratic support so long as Vice President Joe Biden stays out of the race. Governor O'Malley, who does have a good history on marijuana policy, could be sensing an opportunity to garner support among Democratic primary voters by being the first presidential mainstream candidate to call for marijuana legalization. California lawmakers quietly passed Friday the state's most significant medical marijuana legislation in almost 2 decades, but some leaders in medical marijuana worry that the law's good intentions could get lost in the weeds. Paving the way for what supporters say is a much-needed regulatory framework for the state's multi-billion-dollar medical cannabis industry, the California Senate and Assembly voted to approve the historic Medical Marijuana Regulation and Safety Act, which will require licenses for cannabis dispensaries and create a new state agency to oversee the industry. Steve D'Angelo, co-founder of the Arcview Group, Mammoth Marijuana Investment Firm, and the Harborside Health Center, a nonprofit dispensary in the state, said, quote, "Some of the language in the bill is unclear or may be in conflict with prior legislation," end quote. Meanwhile, lawmakers who approved the measure say they had waited long enough. Quote, "We knew it had to be done this year," end quote, said Assembly member Rob Bonta. Washington could get lots more pot stores. State regulators will allow medical marijuana providers to seek retail licenses later this fall. There are no strict limits on how many new licenses could be granted, and there is no requirement that they focus on medical patients. The passage of Initiative 502 in 2012 launched Washington's regulated marijuana system, but officials watched in dismay as hundreds of unlicensed medical marijuana dispensaries sprouted on street corners around the state. Now, under a new state law, gray market marijuana providers must get state retail licenses or close their doors. Liquor and Cannabis Board spokesman Brian Smith said the number of new licenses his agency can grant is open-ended. He said legislators estimate that 800 dispensary owners may seek the new licenses, and perhaps 400 will be eligible to receive them. So far, the Liquor and Cannabis Board has issued 196 retail licenses in the state of Washington. Michael Minardi is on a mission to make recreational marijuana legal in Florida next year. Minardi is a West Palm Beach attorney who won a medical necessity defense for pot charges against his client. He is teamed with fellow attorney Bill Wolsifer and marijuana activist Karen Goldstein to form the corporation Sensible Florida and an associated group Regulate Florida. Together, they have developed a proposed amendment to the state constitution that would legalize and regulate recreational marijuana for adults. The Florida Cannabis Act proposes legalizing pot and regulating it like alcohol. It would allow anyone 21 or older to purchase and possess up to an ounce of marijuana and, if licensed, grow up to 6 plants at home. A convention focused on medical marijuana drew several thousand people to downtown Boston over the weekend as Massachusetts gears up for a likely ballot fight over legalizing the substance for recreational use. 50 national and local vendors hawked their wares, which included pipes, lights aimed at helping marijuana grow, and a $150 machine that can make edibles infused with the substance, along with salves. The convention, held inside the castle at Park Plaza, also highlighted an industry in its infancy in the Bay State, as some young men in t-shirts laid out their pipes on a table and not much else. They stood alongside older men in suits promoting medical marijuana dispensaries and software meant to help manage dispensaries' businesses. Voters could end up deciding whether to legalize marijuana for recreational use in 2016 if supporters of two competing initiatives clear a number of hurdles. This has been your 420 Radio News for Monday, September 14th, 2015. I'm Russ Belville.
The Russ Belville Show, where we don't change our position on decriminalization in an election year.
The Russ Belville Show is proudly sponsored by the Marijuana Business Association. The MJBA, called by NBC News the Cannabis Chamber of Commerce, is the fastest growing business association in the fastest growing industry in America. I've been working with the MJBA for years, and I personally invite you to join the MJBA. MJBA also publishes the popular MJ Headline News on Facebook and the MJNewsNetwork.com and Marijuana Channel 1 on YouTube. Visit mjba.net for more details. NORMAL stands for Responsible Adult Cannabis Use. If cannabis use is causing problems in your life, consider taking a break or seeking medical assistance. Consider ceasing cannabis use if you have a family history of mental illness. Don't drive or operate heavy machinery while impaired by cannabis use. Cannabis use is not without risks, even though the risks are far less than those posed by legal drugs. Oregon has joined Washington and Colorado in legalizing marijuana. We're Portland NORML, the national organization for the reform of marijuana laws chapter in Portland, Oregon. Join us as we celebrate the launch of an exciting new era in marijuana freedom in Oregon. Our job has just begun. Powerful interests want to white out the most important portions of Oregon's legalization law. By joining Portland NORML, you add your voice to the thousands who voted for Measure 91 and want it to be implemented as written. The people have spoken. Now it is time for the legislature to obey the will of the people. Find out more about Portland NORML at portlandnormal.org. Attend our monthly membership meetings on the fourth Saturday of the month. See our website for more details. Portland NORML, ensuring responsible adult marijuana consumers are afforded the same rights, privileges, and responsibilities as beer drinkers. And behind the headlines today, we're going to talk about why we do not have a cannabis cup in the Pacific Northwest. And before we begin, let me make it perfectly clear. High Times would love to have a cannabis cup in Seattle and in Portland. So how in the hell is that not happening? This weekend, High Times announced the new Central California Medical Cannabis Cup, bringing to 3 the number of events being held in California where vendors can openly display marijuana and any adult patient who wants to can enjoy their marijuana freely in the medication area. Clio, Michigan recently held its Medical Cannabis Cup as well. So how is it those 2 non-legal states can have 4 cannabis cups while 2 legal states can have 0? This year, High Times announced the first International Cannabis Cup not in Amsterdam, as the event will pair with the Rastafari Roots Fest to celebrate decriminalization of sacramental ganja and medical cannabis on the island nation of Jamaica. So how is it High Times can bring the leaders of a foreign government and a world religious movement together to work out a suitable arrangement for holding a cannabis cup in a place where marijuana is still technically illegal under national law and international treaty, but they can't find an event space to hold a cannabis cup in the 2 states where recreational marijuana and medical marijuana are legal? Well, it's as simple as the song goes. Blame it on the alcohol, folks. In both Washington and Oregon, the oversight and regulation on recreational cannabis falls to the liquor control boards. In Washington State, it's the Washington State Liquor and Cannabis Board, and in Oregon, it's the Oregon Liquor Control Commission. Here in Oregon, the OLCC has promulgated rules that declare, quote, any establishment with a state liquor license is public, including patios or decks set aside for smokers. Allowing marijuana use may put an establishment's liquor license in jeopardy, end quote. And then our marijuana legalization states that marijuana cannot be displayed or used in a public place. Now, here's the kicker. It doesn't even matter if the venue is serving alcohol at the time. So that eliminates from Cannabis Cup consideration just about any venue that holds a liquor license, which is just about any venue with the size, layout, parking, and access that can handle 10,000 tokers at a time. Now, High Times tried. They went as far as trying to have the event in a suburb 20 minutes drive south of Portland called Milwaukee, using closed-off streets and warehouse space to hold an event about half the size, but they got nowhere with the local authorities. So no Portland Cannabis Cup yet. Then in Washington State, the State Liquor and Cannabis Board had the same sort of opposition to public marijuana use venues, but they had been backing their threats up by using the Clean Air Act to go after venues with alcohol that might allow pot use. You'll remember Frankie's Sports Bar and Grill in Olympia. We visited it on the show. They skirted the ban by allowing the second floor to be a volunteer-staffed private club, and other places formed BYOB, bring your own buds, private clubs and vapor lounges for cannabis consumers to hang out and socialize. But undeterred, the Washington governor pressured the Liquor and Cannabis Board to adopt rules to prohibit marijuana use at any place with a liquor license. Later, the legislature followed up by adopting a law that makes operating, quote, a club, association, or other business, for profit or otherwise, that conducts or maintains a premises for the primary or incidental purpose of providing a location where members or other persons may keep or consume marijuana on the premises, end quote, a Class C felony. And that pretty much killed any possibility of a Seattle Cannabis Cup. Now, the liquor authorities in Washington and Oregon want you to know that they're doing this for your own good, you see. Seattle's Como News reports, quote, officials are concerned about people mixing marijuana and alcohol, especially if they're going to be driving home, end quote. Okay, sure. So why are they working to prohibit marijuana use in public places that aren't serving alcohol where the marijuana is used? And why would that be a concern in the Portland suburb of Milwaukee, where officials just opened up a brand new light rail line that goes straight to where the venue is located, especially after the OLCC gave a green light to have a beer garden at the celebration at the platform of the tracks at the Milwaukee stop opening this past weekend? Sorry, you can't convince me this is due to the fear of impaired drivers when there has never been much effort to force bars to require a valet to take their patrons' car keys and require a successful breathalyzer blow to get them back. This is a war between drugs, plain and simple. Big alcohol doesn't like the idea of marijuana crowding its monopoly on good time public party fun, and big government doesn't like the idea of mainstreaming the acceptance of adult public marijuana use. So long as marijuana smoking remains a dirty, harmful habit whose addicts are outlaws, tolerated only so long as they remain housebound, it remains possible to maintain discrimination against those consumers in employment, childcare, medical care, and other segments of society. We may have been emancipated, but we still remain in our Jim Crow status of second-class citizenship. The majority forces upon us an unjust law they do not hold themselves to. Alcohol drinkers and tobacco smokers have numerous public events at which they may socialize.
Unbelievable.
It's not fair, it's not right, and we will not stop until Portland and Seattle are allowed to have the same kind of cannabis cup that Denver throws annually. Speaking of Denver, it's 4:20 in Denver, Colorado. It's time for us to take a break. When we come back, we've got some drug war data mining in the National Survey on Drug Use and Health and how the prohibitionists can't help but spin it the wrong way.
Get the latest updates on the Russ Belville Show by following Radical Russ on Twitter and liking the Russ Belville Show on Facebook.
Get.Buzz. .Buzz is the internet platform that fuels community interest, excitement, and new experiences. .Buzz is the premier online destination for internet users seeking the latest news on a variety of topics. .Buzz appeals to groups active in blogging, communications, journalism, advertising, and marketing. .Buzz offers registrants a stronger alternative to the shrinking namespace of existing top-level domain names, such as .com, .net, and .org. Get your name now at get.buzz. You're listening to 420 Radio. Listen Tuesdays at 1 p.m. Pacific for Marijuana Today, podcasting on Shout Engine. Marijuana Today is the most in-depth discussion and analysis of the current state of marijuana business and politics, featuring guests from the top activism, lobbying, and business organizations working to perfect marijuana legalization in the United States. Check our online listings for Marijuana Today with Chris Lodekar from marijuanatoday.com. The Fingerboard extension has fretted instruments to enhance your creativity. It has new and used guitars and banjos from beginning to high class. The Fingerboard extension has National Resophonic, Husson Dalton, Larrabee, Heritage and Recording King guitars, and Mike Ramsey, Wildwood, Gold Tone, and Recording King banjos. The Fingerboard extension also has drum stuff, used gear, and parts. Stop by the Fingerboard extension, downtown Corvallis, Oregon at 120 Northwest 2nd, or check out the inventory on the web at fingerboardextension.com and reverb.com. Arguing for the end of adult marijuana prohibition is easy because we have facts, science, reason, compassion, evidence, truth, and logic on our side. It is even easier when researchers catalog it all for us. Learn how to gather the facts on marijuana use, arrests, seizures, rehabs, drug tests, and more in this edition of Drug War Data Mining.
Well, folks, the 2014 National Survey on Drug Use and Health got released late last week, and the prohibitionists dug into it, feverishly trying to find the proof they needed to show that legalization of marijuana in Colorado and Washington state led to an epidemic of teenagers turning into pot zombies, roaming the streets in search of strains. Unfortunately for them, the data did not show that to have happened. But that did not stop them from trying to fool the mainstream media with their press releases. The Community Anti-Drug Coalitions of America, also known as CADCA, issued a headline that read, 2014 National Survey on Drug Use and Health finds marijuana use continuing to rise among youth. Now, if you get past the headline and you actually read their text, they'll even tell you they're playing shenanigans with the data. They say marijuana continues to be the most commonly used illicit drug, 8.4% of Americans 12 and older, up from 7.5% in 2013, but especially growing among those 26 and older. The percentage of teens who were current marijuana users in 2014 was similar to recent years. They say it themselves in the press release that is headlined, Marijuana Use Continuing to Rise Among Youth. Other than it's been similar than recent years. And they even note in another paragraph that the increase in marijuana use was, quote, driven particularly by the increase in adult marijuana use. In fact, taking a look over the past decade, marijuana use for teens monthly was 7.6% in 2004, 7.4% in 2009, and 7.4% in 2014. Hasn't really changed in a decade. But monthly use of cigarettes went from 11.9% to 4.9%, just about cut in half or more. Monthly use of alcohol went from 17.6% to 11.5%, cut monthly use of alcohol by about a third. So despite CADCA's predictions, marijuana use has remained steady among teens, while the use of the two legal drugs that can actually kill you has gone down. And General Dean, who is the head of CADCA, believes that as the public begins to perceive marijuana as less harmful, it's sending the wrong message to the youth. He was actually right about that. The kids are getting the message that marijuana is less harmful than alcohol and other drugs. And in fact, the perception of risk by teens has declined. The perception of risk, that is, kids who think smoking pot at least once a week can be harmful, has fallen to only a quarter of 16 and 17-year-olds who believe that. Now, of course, their perception of risk has gone down because marijuana has gone from being the gateway drug to heroin that supports terrorism and turns your brain into a fried egg to being a legal herbal product mom and dad might use. Of course, the perception of risk is going to go down. But over that same 10-year period, as the risk perception went down, the marijuana use stayed the same. And then my favorite cherry picking of data came from Kevin Sabet's Project SAM. Kevin Sabet's Project SAM issued a press release. Now, they dug deep to try to find some scary stats. Their headline says, Health and Human Services finds heavy marijuana use soaring among young people. All caps, heavy marijuana use soaring among young people. Here's their quote. Today, the Department of Health and Human Services found that heavy marijuana use among monthly users, defined as 20 or more days of marijuana use per month, significantly increased among 12 to 17-year-olds in 2014 compared to 2013. Overall past month marijuana use among those 12 and older also jumped significantly. Well, here's the problem. The headline is precisely the opposite of what happened. The data comes from Table 6.1b, number of days used marijuana in the past year among past year users and the number of days used marijuana in the past month among past month users by age group, percentages 2013 and 2014. And when you look at the table, among minors aged 12 to 17 who use marijuana monthly and used it 20 or more days per month, it declined from 25.6% to 21.8%, a relative decrease of 14.8%. Even when you look at the annual teen users, kids that are using pot 100 days a year or more declined by a third. So the problem here is they looked at the table and transposed the 2 years, thinking the first number was 2014, the second number is 2013, got it backwards. Now, when I pointed this out to him in a series of tweets and article I wrote for Marijuana Politics, the author, a guy named Will, quickly changed and scrubbed the data section part, right? The text. He took out the part about 20 or more days per year and all that, but kept the same headline over the weekend. It wasn't until the Washington Post got a hold of Kevin Sabet personally to complain about the false lie of a headline did they reissue a brand new press release with a different headline. So the news is kids are getting the truth about marijuana, and it's not making them smoke pot any more than they ever did before. But that's not the kind of news Project SAM wants to hear. Inadvertently, Project SAM has told us that in the first year since full retail legalization has transpired, among kids nationally who smoked pot in the past month, they're doing it less often. The rate of kids nationally smoking pot monthly hasn't changed, even though those kids are more likely to think regular pot smoking isn't harmful. When the opponents of marijuana legalization like Project SAM are making the case for us, you know they're flustered. We're back with Dr. Mitch right after this. Get your questions ready.
You're tuned into the Russ Belville Show, the voice of the marijuana nation. The Russ Belville Show, the National Wildlife Refuge for marijuana unicorns.
At Herbie's Cannabis Seeds, we pride ourselves on bringing you the best quality seeds from the world's most respected cannabis seed producers, all at the lowest online prices. You can find Herbie's seeds at herbiesheadshop.com. All cannabis seeds are sold as souvenirs, and as a means of preserving cannabis genetics, Herbie's Seeds in no way intends to condone, promote, or incite the use of illegal or controlled substances. We strongly urge all prospective customers to check their national laws prior to placing an order. Herbie's Seeds at herbiesheadshop.com. Proud sponsors of the Russ Belville Show and 420 Radio.
This is Cannabis Facts from Robert Platshorn's thesilvertour.org, supported by our donors and Hemp Inc., poised to lead America's hemp revolution at hempinc.com. In 1937, the second most prescribed medicine, marijuana, was banned. It wasn't about marijuana. The paper, oil, and chemical industries lobbied to end hemp farming. No longer labor-intensive, an acre of hemp produced more quality paper than 4 acres of trees. Plastics and fibers could be produced from a plant. Hemp can even produce 10 times the energy of today's ethanol. As marijuana prohibition ends, many states now allow farmers to again grow hemp. This was Cannabis Facts from the silvertour.org, an educational nonprofit supported by our donors and Hemp Inc., a public company poised to process America's hemp crop at hempinc.com.
Hey everybody, it's Radical Russ here from 420 Radio, inviting you to be like me and get your ink done at Lucky Horseshoe Tattoo, Fort Worth's most female-friendly, clean, sterile, awesome tattoo shop. Thomas and his crew are true artists who can design you a custom piece or use a design you bring in. Lucky Horseshoe Tattoo also offers all styles of tattooing as well as piercings and all-around fun. In the DFW area, stop by Lucky Horseshoe Tattoo and tell them Radical Russ sent you. Trust me, it'll feel awesome.
It's time for the Russ Belville Show's Cannabis Q&A with Dr. Mitch Earlywine. Dr. Earlywine is a professor of psychology at the State University of New York at Albany and a leading author and researcher on cannabinoids and health, who pins the Ask Dr. Mitch column for High Times Magazine. Get your questions ready in our live chat or call in to 971-533-7111 now.
Welcome back, everyone. We got Dr. Mitch Earlywine on the line. How you doing, Dr. Mitch?
Happy Rosh Hashanah.
Happy Rosh Hashanah to you too, sir. Hey, we want to let everyone know the chat room is open for questions, or you can call in live at 84-420 radio. We got a lot to cover, so let's just dig right into the topics today. One that is very, very timely for me, a Medscape article that's talking about how heavy marijuana use is tied to midlife pre-diabetes, but not diabetes. And as a midlife guy, I'm 47, I just got diagnosed with pre-diabetes. What do I need to know, Dr. Mitch?
Well, the weird thing about this is I honestly don't think cannabis is the issue. And I can, walk through the sort of idea that maybe munchies led you to eat too much sugar or something like that. But it really does come down to just standard diet stuff. And I feel like folks who are rushed, folks who are used to, working outside the law and stuff often find themselves eating the foods that aren't necessarily conducive to good insulin functioning. And, I hate to say it, the data suggests that, laying off the sugar, laying off the sweets, keeping the exercise high, and switching to a plant-based diet are really the way to go. Nobody ever likes to hear those data, but that's really what the science keeps saying.
We've seen other studies that have shown that regular cannabis consumers tend to have a lower body mass index. I'm wondering, is this study catching people who would have normally come up for diabetes and they're just catching them for pre-diabetes? Like if the average was 3 out of 10 people get diabetes, but now we're finding 2 out of 10 of them are getting pre and only one's getting diabetes, wouldn't that be a good thing?
Well, in fact, there may be sort of a buffer about this. I'm also eager to point out that we're finding more and more folks who are regular cannabis users are less afraid to go to the physician now and talk about it. And so I feel like some of this may have been there all along. It just never got uncovered before.
Ah, good point. All right, looking to the high school students, this was a big scare that came out through the media in a study that showed 1 out of 5 high school kids who uses e-cigarettes tried to use those vaporizers to vaporize marijuana. And of course, they freak out about how easy it is to conceal and the smell's not as bad and so forth. What do we know from this data?
What's intriguing here is really what's left unsaid, and that's that we actually don't know how the e-cigarettes work as far as some of the propylene glycol and the things that are made for cannabis-related products. So I hate to sound like an alarmist, but we just don't have those data. And we've, had a couple of neat folks in the field just point out that these cannabis-based liquids aren't necessarily something we know a whole lot about. And then, in truth, I'm not fainting from the idea that folks who've got a vaporizer or a vapor handy would try cannabis oil in it. That's just something we would expect teens to do. but I don't feel like the usual messages against adolescent use are going to be any different as far as this kind of use is concerned.
All right. And we have a question from our chat room wanting to know if you've heard of any folks that have recipes or methods of turning Rick Simpson oil, the kind of liquid viscous oil, into more of a salve. Have you ever heard of that?
I honestly haven't. In truth, I don't have anything published to suggest that the Rick Simpson oil is necessary for making a salve. So, in truth, any of the standard oil-based procedures that would make a salve with regular plant cannabis are probably going to be cheaper in the long run anyway.
Okay. A great story coming out of the Daily Caller showing that marijuana users are 45% less likely to fall victim to bladder cancer. Didn't know that we were very likely to fall victim to bladder cancer in the first place, but what is this news telling us?
Well, what's curious about this is an odds ratio that if it were going in the other direction, I would say, hey, this isn't big enough to make a big deal out of. And so I hate to say it, but this is nice, and the idea that local cannabinoids in the bladder might somehow protect against cancer, but until it's like doubling the effect, I just not too optimistic about this replicating. When we get a larger effect size, then I'll start trying to hunt down the mechanism. We know that locally THC and other cannabinoids can have anti-cancer effects. It wouldn't be stunning if they'd also generalize to the bladder, but I don't want to jump up and down about this until we got a headline that says marijuana users half as likely to fall into bladder cancer. Then I would suddenly be a little more intrigued.
Okay. Is the risk of bladder cancer that great in the first place?
Not until about age 70.
Okay.
So I feel like we're dealing with such small fractions, even though this is an 11-year follow-up data set, that it's I just don't want to make a big deal out of it. This is one of those things where it's a huge sample and it's statistically significant, but the effect is actually pretty small. And so I would hate to think that this is the way to prevent bladder cancer. It's actually better to just keep your alcohol consumption and tobacco consumption down.
Yeah. And when we're talking about these low incidences, it kind of reminds me, if you buy a lottery ticket, you got a 1 in a million chance to strike it rich. And if you buy 2, you may have doubled your chances, but there's still not a lot of chance there.
And in fact, it's just barely above 0. So
exactly. All right. We got to follow up on the Rick Simpson salve question, wondering, do tinctures work as well when we're talking about skin? I mean, can you use a tincture for transdermal just like you would use a salve?
Well, what's funny is we didn't have documented transdermal basically absorption of THC until we had some of these things that are a little bit like a nicotine patch, and they actually kind of abrade the skin. And so as much as I love those, tincture oil massages and things like that, we actually don't have published evidence that would be the case. I think that would be a great place to start. So an alcohol-based tincture in an oil-based salve, coconut oil or something like that, would certainly be pleasant regardless, and that would be a great place to experiment without having to spend a lot of money, and essentially go from there.
All right. A big statistic that came out last week and was, heralded by a number of online outlets was that daily marijuana use among college students is at the highest rate in 35 years. I mean, they studied it in 1980. They got a big number, and it's been lower than that ever since until now. So, Dr. Mitch, are all your new incoming freshmen just blazed all the time or what?
Well, what happens, in fact, and I've got some new data on this, is when you make the survey as anonymous as possible, some of these rates actually end up being higher than they would be if they're not making it as anonymous as possible. And so I think as the stigma associated with cannabis use is dropping, this Monitoring the Future program, which is a big survey done by the University of Michigan, is basically letting folks feel more comfortable fessing up. So I'm not sure if this is really so much a big increase in use as it is an increase in confession of use. The other thing what we're finding is that basically daily or near daily marijuana use isn't necessarily a great predictor of problems, particularly if it's late in the day. So if you're, getting high a half an hour before you watch The Simpsons and go to bed, odds are high it's not creating a lot of negative consequences. It's the wake and bake folks who then try to run to class and comprehend something that often run into trouble.
Yeah, good point. And, it's interesting when you look at the graphs of alcohol, marijuana, and cigarette usage. Alcohol pretty steadily goes down and cigarette pretty steadily goes down. And it makes sense. You'd think as people get more educated, there's going to be less use. Marijuana went way up in the 70s and then way down in the 80s and then way up in the 90s and then flattened out in the 2000s. It seems to correlate better with the messages coming out of the White House than anything else. 1980s, of course, the Nancy Reagan Just Say No era. And what do you know? People didn't want to admit to a government pollster that they were smoking pot.
I mean, I can hardly blame him when Reagan was in the White House. I didn't want to confess to literally having any taxable income.
Yeah,
so
good point.
You can imagine it's a tough situation where you've got self-report bias contributing as much as actual use, and I'm actually not trying to encourage daily use, but clearly the negative consequences are the thing to measure, not did you actually smoke a joint.
All right, folks, that's all the time we've got, unfortunately, to get questions in for Dr. Mitch. But if you've got a question that didn't get answered, you can always send it in privately and anonymously by emailing 420research@gmail.com, 420research@gmail.com. And Dr. Mitch will be with us next Monday for another edition of Cannabis Q&A, so you can call in next week if you want to. Happy Rosh Hashanah, Dr. Mitch, and give my best to your family.
Hey, thanks so much for all the fun when I was in Portland there, man. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, we got Dr. Mitch out in the convertible. He was digging it. Take it easy, Dr. Mitch. We'll see you next week. All right, folks, stay tuned. We got time for the Radical Rant, a recording of my presentation on the marijuana and media panel just yesterday. Right about 4:20, as a matter of fact, on yesterday's Oregon Medical Marijuana Business Conference at the Hilton in downtown Portland, Oregon. And then stay tuned for Hour 2. We got Judge Jim Gray and Congressman Earl Blumenauer from the same event.
You're tuned into the Russ Belville Show, the voice of the marijuana nation. You're listening to Radical Russ on the Russ Belville Show.
This is Radical Russ encouraging you to take a look at the Weed Blog every day. Johnny Green and the staff at the Weed Blog are on top of all the latest developments in the fight to end marijuana prohibition nationwide. You can even get the Weed Blog on your smartphone by installing the Weed Blog app for iPhone and Android. If it's about weed, it's on the Weed Blog, including my original writing. So don't delay. Read the Weed Blog today. You know Herb Thrasher from the Herb Thrasher Flower Hour. Now get ready for Herb Age Designs for the proud cannabis consumer. Herb Age Designs, lifestyle gear for the 420 friendly. Herb Age Designs, we've got Frisbee golf discs and durable hemp gear. Herb Age Designs, we've got shot glasses, drinking glasses, coffee mugs, and beer cozies. Check us out on Facebook and online at herbagedesigns.com. And follow Herb Age and Herb Thrasher on Twitter.
Hey, what's up? It's Herb Thrasher, and you're listening to 420 Radio.
We must wage what I have called total war against public enemy number one.
I support a change in law to end federal criminal penalties for possession of up to 1 ounce of marijuana.
That marijuana, pot, grass, whatever you want to call it, is probably the most dangerous drug.
Some think there won't be room for them in jail. We'll make room.
I experimented with marijuana a time or two, and I didn't like it and didn't inhale.
And one major responsibility is to encourage people to use less drugs.
Entirely legitimate topic for debate.
Radical Rant.
All right, for today's Radical Rant, my appearance at the Oregon Medical Marijuana Business Conference.
Our next speaker, in many ways, helped pave the way for the the alternative media covering marijuana. He's been at it for a long time activist with NORML. He's now the executive director with Portland NORML. He's got the Russ Belville show on 420radio.org. He blogs for us at marijuanapolitics.com. He writes for High Times, Alternate, the Huffington Post. He is the thorn in the side of prohibitionists all across the country. One of the hardest working men in the marijuana movement. Give it up for Mr. Russ Belville.
Give it up one more time for Anthony Johnson. As he said, I'm Russ Belville. I'm the Howard Stern of marijuana, I guess, the king of all media, something like that. But it's my pleasure to be doing this. I can't believe it's actually a job. But I want to find out a little bit about the folks out there. How many of you are in the growing business or getting into it? Okay, how about the dispensing business or getting into it? Processors, like making edibles or tinctures? Okay, so everybody here is kind of, you know, obviously, medical marijuana business conference. You got a business angle here. So how does the business angle fit in with the media angle, fit in with what I'm doing? It's because what you do makes the stories that the media will report on. And sometimes you make our jobs easy. You get an Anthony Johnson running a Measure 91 and having a smart, sophisticated campaign, makes my job really easy to defend that. On the other hand, you have people opening up a medical marijuana dispensary and calling it wake and bake, makes my job a little harder, right? So I'm a little selfish on this. I'm looking about how are you going to make my job easier as business people, and the way you'll do that is by following sensible regulations, pushing for strong self-policing, having high standards, you know, professionalizing this industry, making the people, forcing the people out there to understand that we are professional, law-abiding citizens who are just trying to fuel the American economy and trying to bring something that's been happening for years above ground to benefit society as a whole. So, some of the ways that we can start thinking about this is to think about how the media is portraying us and what effect we can have on those portrayals. When I first started getting into this around 2008, I was working for National NORML, and I was on a media panel of some sort, and there's a presentation I was doing, and I did like a top 10 list of the pot pun headlines. Have you seen these? You get these, you get some serious news story to come out, you know, say it's a legislative failure, and they'll say, the plans of the initiative went up in smoke Tuesday. It was a pipe dream. They just couldn't hash it out. Right? These are mainstream organizations, mainstream USA Today, New York Times, you know, LA Times, with pot pun headlines. And I struggle to think if this were a serious legislative failure for the LGBT community or black community or handicapped community, that they'd be so light about it, that they'd use this pun and these kind of derogatory terms. Anthony brought up that point of going to the Oregonian about medical around marijuana. And these things are important because we all live in conceptual frames, and the frames define how we see things and how we vote and how we decide on leadership and so forth. And if the frame around medical is, you know, sarcasm quotes, makes it harder for people like me to defend what's going on. So that's why it's important that we catch these people, catch the media, catch the government especially when they use these kind of terms, and call them on it. The LGBT community did this years ago when they pushed for accurate reporting of their issues, to no longer call it gay marriage but marriage equality, to no longer call it homosexuality but to call it gay and lesbian. There's all sorts of ways they influence the debate by changing the frames. So as business people, these media sources, by the way, are in the business of selling advertising, and they can only sell advertising if they're getting a lot of clicks, if they're getting a lot of hits. And if they know that the business people out there might not want to advertise with them if their industry is being portrayed in a negative way, that's going to affect the way they report as well. Another thing that I think is important as far as what I'm doing, and a lot of folks smell the truth, a lot of great blogs, marijuana politics, is that we are providing the important counter narrative sometimes because the way the mainstream media will report on things can be shaped by our opponents, who oftentimes have PhDs behind their names. They have the trust of the public because they work in the rehab industry, or they're in law enforcement, or they're elected officials who, despite all that, don't really know a whole lot about what they're talking about when it comes to marijuana. There's a lot of ignorance out there, and those of us who are educated in this have the duty to report on this and to show how they are misframing our issue. So let me give you an example, because I was just so thrilled this week that this was coming up, this panel came up, and this week there was like 4 or 5 different stories that covered my point exactly. It's like the timing couldn't have been better. The first thing that happened, this was back last month in August. There's 2 surveys that the federal government does on the use of marijuana in America, or use of drugs in America. One is called Monitoring the Future. It's been done by the University of Michigan since 1975, and since 75, they've asked 12th graders their various experience with drugs and alcohol. Over time, they added 8th and 10th graders, undergrads, and so forth, added more questions. But generally, this has been a long-term, since 75, what is that? We're 40 years now of this study where they ask questions about drug and alcohol use. So this time, when they asked these questions, they found out that there was a slight rise in the pot smoking among college kids. And college kids defined as the first 4 years out of high school. So, 18 to 22-ish area. And there was headlines all over the internet, all over the papers that said, pot smoking in college is on the rise. Pot smoking in college is the highest it's ever registered since 1980. And the way they do this is they take this little fact, which is technically true, out of context and away from any other of the facts that would give you some idea what's really gone on here. There was a hint of it with some other headlines. Some other headlines came out and said, more college kids are smoking pot daily than cigarettes. More college kids are smoking pot than cigarettes, oh my God. And the whole idea, the framing around this was, A, legalization happened, and B, oh my God, they're smoking pot. Well, you could have kind of predicted that perhaps, but how scary was it in context? Well, the headlines actually should have read, slight rise in pot smoking, alcohol and cigarette use at lowest rates ever recorded. It's not that pot smoking went through the roof and passed cigarette smoking, it's that cigarette smoking crashed through the floor below pot smoking. And there's these great graphs, and you can find them on Marijuana Politics. I drew up the graphs of the alcohol use, tobacco use, and the marijuana use among the different age groups. And basically what we found is, since I went to high school, I graduated in 85. In 1985, 9 out of 10 of my high school senior classmates had tried alcohol, at least tried it. And 7 out of 10 had tried cigarettes, and about 5 out of 10 had tried pot. Now, in the latest data, kids graduating high school, seniors, about 7 out of 10 have tried alcohol, about 4 out of 10, less than 4 out of 10 are smoking cigarettes, and about 4 out of 10 are smoking pot. Now, we didn't arrest or ticket or fine or force rehab anybody who is an adult who is smoking or drinking in that time to get those declines. But the media won't give you that context. We have to force that context. We have to say that pot smoking doesn't happen in a vacuum or over just a 1-year period. We have 40 years worth of data to look at here. And so that's part of what we do, is to give context. Another story that came up is that the National Survey on Drug Use and Health came out. This is the second of those studies that asks about drug and alcohol use amongst various populations. And the Project SAM office here in Oregon, which there exists such a thing now, talk about timing, about 3 years later, right? But anyway, there's a Project SAM is Smart Approaches to Marijuana. It's Kevin Sabet's organization. It's the leading anti-legalization org out there. And so this guy from Project SAM Oregon made a big deal of the fact that in the latest figure, the 1-year increase among teenage monthly pot smokers in Colorado, it went up like 4.8% or something. It was and I don't have the number memorized, but it went up a slight bit, right? 4 or 5%. Big, huge deal. We legalized pot in Colorado, and more teenagers are smoking pot. But the context he left out is that the state of Florida, pot smoking among teenagers went up like 7%. Florida went up more than Colorado. Utah went up more than Washington. So there's context that they leave out, and it's up to us to provide this context. Third story, on this same national survey on drug use and health, they came out with a headline that says, Health and Human Services, this is Project SAM again, at the national level. Health and Human Services finds that pot smoking dramatically increasing among the youth. Pot smoking, marijuana use dramatically increasing among the youth. And within the text, they say, among monthly pot smokers, teenagers who smoke pot monthly, those who smoke 20 days or more a month, the heavy users, went up a staggering percentage, it significantly increased. Marijuana legalized in Colorado, significant increase in heavy use among monthly pot smokers. And so I have this tendency, whenever they state something like that, I want to go find the table and actually look it up. And I looked it up and I discovered they transposed the years. Heavy monthly use actually decreased almost 15% in the year after legalization. So I called them on it, wrote a post on marijuanapolitics.com, left a comment with a link to the table that the federal government produces saying, you might want to take a look at line 5 there. They changed the text within, but didn't change the headline. They kept blaring that headline out over the Labor Day weekend. Not accidental, folks, in my opinion. This is when the kids are going back to school and it's time to scare the parents, and let's just show them how bad legalization is. Fortunately, Christopher Ingraham for the Washington Post picked up on this and wrote a piece on this that forced Kevin Sabet and these guys to issue a blundering public apology and take down the headline. So this is the kind of impact we are having now, where the mainstream's starting to have our back. Washington Post is starting to have our back. So to wrap up, you know, I'm a child of the 80s, right? I lived through Nancy Reagan showing up on different strokes to tell Arnold and Willis to say no to drugs. Remember? Who's with me, right? I lived through the time when the federal government was supplying money surreptitiously to TV producers, Hollywood producers, to slip in anti-drug storylines into the sitcoms and the family dramas. We lived through the war. I go back to this is your brain on drugs, fried egg ad, all the way through the George W. Bush, you smoke pot so you helped terrorism ads. So to be at this time in history, when we have billboards out on MLK with a big hunk of shatter on them, when we've got entrepreneurs sitting in this audience and all throughout the state who are ready to actually have a growth industry, pardon the pun, in this country once again, jobs that can't be shipped to Mexico, jobs that can't be outsourced, jobs that can't be replaced by technology. I am so honored and proud to be doing the job I'm doing in the media. I'm Radical Russ. You can find me everywhere online under Radical Russ. Thank you so much.
There we go. I was actually the last speaker of the last day at the Oregon Medical Marijuana Business Conference. Very excited to be that, and thanks to Alex Rogers, Anthony Johnson, and the whole crew for having me out there at the event. Stay tuned. We got some heavyweights coming up in the next hour. We're going to open up with Congressman Earl Blumenauer, my congressman, his speech at the Oregon Medical Marijuana Business Conference yesterday. And then we got Roots Monday with Bacon Dan calling in with some tunes. And then we'll end the day with Judge Jim Gray. Thanks for joining us, folks. That's all the time we got for the podcast hour. You podcast listeners, you can catch a replay of the Russ Belville Show's second hour on 420radio.org. Just visit the donate section to become a monthly subscriber, and you can access the Hour 2 replays. For everyone here at Rolla J, I'm Radical Russ. Until next time, take care of each other, tokers.
This is the Russ Belville Show. The Russ Belville Show is blogging and podcasting daily at radicalruss.com.
You take a seed, you plant it, you grow it, you dry it, you roll it, you smoke it. You take a seed, you plant it, you grow it, you dry it, you roll it, you smoke it. You take a seed, you plant it, you grow it, you dry it, you roll it, you smoke it, and it goes down smooth.
Now it's time for Toker Talk Radio, the voice of the marijuana nation. Where you can toke.
I inhaled frequently.
Or you can talk.
I experimented with marijuana and didn't inhale.
Or you can toke and talk.
10 federal criminal penalties for possession of up to 1 ounce of marijuana.
While we talk about toke on Toker Talk Radio.
So, by the way, when it comes to pot, if you're 40 years old, you live in a log cabin in Oregon, you got 12 giant pot plants in your backyard, have a ball.
Live from beautiful Portland, Oregon at Rolla J Studios.
Hey, this is great. Yes, cannabis.
Plus your calls live at 971-533-7111.
They're walking on their pants with their cap on backwards, listening to Enema Man and Snoopy Poop Dog.
What's to keep somebody from getting all potted up on weed and then getting behind the wheel?
Gateway theory doesn't work. It's a reality.
Holland, is it real? Don't tease me.
We're locking up people that take a couple of puffs of marijuana, and the next thing you know, they got 10 years.
And now, here's your host, the guru of ganja graphics, the sultan of sativa statistics, and the worst nightmare of a reefer-mad prohibitionist. A polite, perspicacious, productive pothead with a propensity for PowerPoint. Radical Russ Belville.
All right, welcome, everyone. It's Hour 2, Toker Talk Radio. I'm Radical Russ Belville, coming to you from beautiful, legal Potland, Oregon, where we've just returned from the Oregon Medical Marijuana Business Conference in Portland. A great event. I've got some more speakers and interviews to bring to you for the rest of the week. I just published the photos on my Google Plus page. But now we give you the keynote speech from my congressman, Representative Earl Blumenauer, who spoke Sunday morning at the Hilton in downtown Portland, Oregon.
And one of the people who's been bringing us towards freedom, really more than anybody in this nation, in my opinion, as someone who gets commended for being in the activism scene for cannabis for 16 years. I know we have people who have put in more than 2 decades, some people more than 3 decades. Congressman Earl Blumenauer is voting to decriminalize cannabis before I was even born, all the way back in 1973. All right? First state to do it. He is leading the way in the halls of Congress on tax issues, on banking issues, on ending criminal prohibition across the country, expunging criminal offenses for people wrongly persecuted by the war on drugs. In my opinion, the best congressman in the country. Please give a warm welcome to Mr. Congressman Earl Blumenauer.
Thank you. Well, thank you, Anthony. Thank you for the warm welcome early on a Sunday morning, particularly after celebrating last night and a very productive first day for the conference. I appreciate not just your warm welcome, but I appreciate your being on the ground floor of the revolution for sensible marijuana reform. I've been talking to people here in Washington, D.C. and around the country about how the momentum is building and talking about the progress that we are seeing. And a couple of people are, progress, that we're still slugging away. This doesn't seem like it's rocket speed to me. Well, first of all, as you say, having been in this arena for over 4 decades, what's happened in the last 40 months looks like warp speed to me, particularly when you consider how long it takes to get anything done in Washington, D.C. or on the state level. Part of what we faced immediately after Oregon became the first state to decriminalize marijuana is we ran into Richard Nixon's misguided, misdirected war on drugs. It was the worst indiscriminate target for that effort. He ignored the advice of his own hand-picked commission headed by Governor Ray Schaefer from Pennsylvania, and started us on a misguided direction in persecuting people for something that humans have used for millennia and was no more dangerous than perfectly legal substances, in fact, less so than tobacco. At some point, people are concerned that there might be some negative consequences from marijuana. Well, there are negative consequences for alcohol, tobacco, riding a motorcycle. Some would say riding a bicycle. There are a host of things that are acceptable in society for adults to choose to do. There may be some who think it would be a better society if all of those potentially dangerous activities, behaviors were eliminated. But when you think about it, I don't think so. I don't think we'd be better off if we made illegal riding bikes, motorcycles, alcohol, tobacco. That's not the choice that we have made as a free society. Usually, you need to get the balance right, and I think we're well on our way to getting the balance right with marijuana policy. But I will say that it took the public to break the paralysis surrounding politicians' timid approaches to this issue, starting in 1996 in California, when the voters decided they were going to legalize medical marijuana. The voters broke through. Likewise, Oregon followed suit. We now have, as you know, 23 states and well over a dozen where some form of medical marijuana is legal. It was the public that led the way, and I think it's appropriate what we've seen more recently dealing with adult use. But we're in the middle of what's going to be a hard and difficult endgame. Some of you are aware that the other side is out again pushing back here in Oregon, throwing dust and misrepresentation. And we're going to see that as a prelude to initiatives that are going to be taken around the country. We're going to have to be vigilant to not let people misrepresent the facts, or to think just because we've had some success in our state with Measure 91, with medical marijuana, that we're sort of on autopilot. We're not on autopilot. We've got a lot of hard work ahead of us to make sure that Measure 91 is implemented, keeping faith with the spirit of the drafters, thank you, Anthony, and the voters, and being able to make sure we build on the momentum that's taking place in our nation's capital and in states around the country. We've been, I think, I've been pleasantly surprised with how fast, for congressional terms, we've watched the pieces put together. I had dinner with Barney Frank a couple of weeks ago in Maine, and we were remarking about how these things that we've been working on for years, we've caught the wave, media attention, the industry is organized, the public is aware. It is remarkable. Just the Congress, the previous Congress, we organized sort of the first marijuana working group of members of Congress. We had 17 pieces of legislation that was introduced. We had 6 successful votes on the floor of the House of Representatives, moving in the right direction in terms of reining in, signaling the need to rein in federal interference, opportunities for hemp cultivation. This Congress already, we have 15 bills, I think, that have introduced. We've had 4 successful votes on the floor of the House. For the first time in history, we've had legislation introduced in the United States Senate. We've seen successful votes, not yet on the floor of the Senate, but in Senate committees dealing with banking, dealing with something that I feel passionately about, that the federal government shouldn't treat veterans as second-class citizens when it comes to medical marijuana. Some of you know I introduced that legislation last Congress. We forced a vote on the floor of the House, and although we lost by some 17 votes, I was proud of the bipartisan support and the awareness that that represented. And I was also pleased that when we forced a vote again this Congress in a House of Representatives that's much more Republican and Tea Party oriented, we lost by only 3 votes. By only 3 votes. And we had more Republicans voting for us and fewer Democrats voting against us. This momentum that's building is profound. It is profound. We are, in addition to the work on Congress, and we're going to continue working with this administration. It was interesting that the acting head of the EA actually has acknowledged that marijuana is not as dangerous as heroin. Now again, that's not rocket science. But when you've seen the inability, and I've questioned people before Congress, maybe some of you have seen some of the videos, where they can't answer that simple question, this is progress. Where we've had the administration roll back one of the unnecessary impediments to research for marijuana. I am still hopeful that President Obama, who is the first president in history to both admit that he smoked marijuana as a kid and he doesn't think it's any dangerous, that administration that has decided that they have bigger fish to fry than interfere with Colorado, Washington, Oregon, Alaska, and Washington, D.C., I'm still hopeful that we'll be able to coax more progress out of them as part of the legacy of this administration. And you should too, looking for ways to reinforce in a positive way, looking for things that are going to make a difference. I'm in the process, as I travel around the country, working on this issue to try and raise the profile, working with people at the national level in my party who are likely to run for Congress. Some of you may have been here in Portland last month when Hillary Clinton acknowledged some of the problems with banking, talked to people individually, understanding that she is sympathetic to the need to have a more rational policy. I've talked extensively with her campaign people. But beyond just the campaigns, I was in New Hampshire last month, where you can't turn around without tripping over a presidential candidate. I mean, you're missing a bet if you don't take advantage of that. You ought to at least have a winter home in New Hampshire. You'll have presidential candidates come up and offer to shovel the snow off your walk or rotate the tires on your car. They're desperate in this little state. And I spent time in New Hampshire. I had an hour-long show on New Hampshire public broadcasting talking about rational marijuana policy, had a town hall there, met with state legislators. They're in the process of finally implementing their medical marijuana program that was authorized several years ago, and people are starting to think there about adult use. One of the things at the trip, though, that just really struck me, and I will conclude on this note. I mentioned I had dinner with Barney. And as I was driving from the airport down to his place, I was listening to Maine Public Broadcasting. And they had a story about Portland, Maine, having 12 heroin overdoses that weekend. 2 fatalities. For Portland, Maine, which is 1/10 of the size of Portland, Oregon. And I have been struck by how the irrationality of our policies, that we focus on marijuana, which actually should be legal. We pose impediments to medical marijuana, which are unjustified. And we ignore this epidemic of prescription drug overdoses, misuse, pill mills, and then people get, when they are unable to feed their painkiller pill habit, they turn to heroin. Well, many of those people in the first place wouldn't have to have opioids if they had freer access to medical marijuana. You know this. I've heard countless stories from people in the industry, from patients, from families of patients who've talked about the difference that this has made, and not the least in terms of dealing with chronic pain. And if we had the opportunity for more, think about the NFL, which is still suspending football players who choose to self-medicate with marijuana because they don't want to be shot up with painkillers or given pills that can literally destroy their careers and their lives. Nate Jackson had that great op-ed in the New York Times last summer who talked about professional football players who self-medicate. He was a tight end for a number of years. And that was in the paper about the same time that we saw people suspended for the season for using marijuana, and the wife beater was suspended for 2 games. We've got our priorities kind of screwed up here, it seems to me. But you've got an opportunity to help us make a profound difference in this country. Not only because of over 1 million people now who have legal access to medical marijuana and use it, but because we're changing outmoded policies. We are committed to not criminalizing behavior that most Americans think should be legal. We are committed to doing the research necessary to be able to provide the answers that people want. We're committed to fixing a criminal justice system that discriminates horribly against young men of color and has disproportionate penalties, absolutely unreasonable, and then having something that can be an albatross around people's neck, haunting them as they try to secure employment and education. This is wrong. We're going to change it. With your help, and I just admitted to somebody again the prediction. In fact, I made it on statewide radio in New Hampshire, bet a lunch, that in 5 years, we'll have turned the corner. We will be treating marijuana like we treat alcohol. States will do what they want. The federal government will stay out of the way. It'll tax, it'll regulate, and it will reform. We'll research. We'll all be better off focusing on real problems. I look forward to continuing to work with you, progress in the years ahead, and to not make a liar out of me about winning this in the next 5 years. Thank you very much.
Congressman Earl Blumenauer at the 2015 Oregon Medical Marijuana Business Conference in Portland.
From now on, you will speak only when spoken to.
And that sound means it's 4:20 here on the West Coast. Time for us to take a break and get lifted. Hope you have the opportunity to join us, and if not, we are fighting for the day when you will be able to. It's coming sooner than you think. We got Roots Monday when we come back, a great mashup from our good friend Bacon Dan, followed by Judge Jim Gray's Saturday keynote speech.
Hey, what's up, everyone? It's Herb Thrasher, and I've got a bong, and you're listening to 420 Radio.
Imagine life without taxes. Let New Era Certified Public Accountants, NewEraCPAs.com, handle your Cannabis 280E and tax strategy. Get your business prepared with New Era CPA's Cannabis Finance Bootcamp. NewEraCPAs.com, with years of experience in the industry, we are one of the nation's leading accounting firms for growers, dispensaries, and ancillary companies from Washington to California. NewEraCPAs.com. The Russ Belville Show is proudly sponsored by the Marijuana Business Association. The MJBA, called by NBC News the Cannabis Chamber of Commerce, is the fastest growing business association in the fastest growing industry in America. I've been working with the MJBA for years, and I personally invite you to join the MJBA. MJBA also publishes the popular MJ Headline News on Facebook and the MJNewsNetwork.com and Marijuana Channel 1 on YouTube. Visit mjba.net for more details. Get.Buzz. .Buzz is the internet platform that fuels community interest, excitement, and new experiences. .Buzz is the premier online destination for internet users seeking the latest news on a variety of topics. .Buzz appeals to groups active in blogging, communications, journalism, advertising, and marketing. .Buzz offers registrants a stronger alternative to the shrinking namespace of existing top-level domain names, such as .com, .net, and .org. Get your name now at get.buzz.
Everyone knows music and marijuana go together, so let's wind up our 20 after break with the Russ Belville Show's Daily Toker Tunes, the best in pod-safe 420 music from around the web. Today is Roots Monday, featuring the blues, country, folk, and jazz music that birthed the modern sounds we enjoy today. Now, sit back and enjoy your Daily Toker Tune.
All right, Monday is upon us, and that means it's time for us to get laid back with some Roots Monday music. We got Bacon Dan on the line, our Mr. Portland. I'm just going to call you Mr. Portland because you're it, man. You embody everything that is Portland.
That's such a compliment, man. I really appreciate that.
Yeah. How's things going with Bacon Dan at this point?
Oh, things are going great. Work's going awesome. Life in the karaoke band is also going awesome. I'm actually off tonight, so I will be singing instead of signing people up. And the weather outside, anybody who's listening, you always think, Portland's gray, kind of cold, or a little bit rainy. Yes, that's exactly what it is today. The rain is almost here. It's like 60 degrees out, super overcast. I am happy as hell and slightly baked, which makes it even better.
That's right. We have two seasons here in Portland. One is shorts and the other is hoodie. And we are in hoodie season for sure.
Absolutely.
Hey, I just got word through Facebook, and I don't remember whose post it was, but I clicked over and, out on Southeast 82nd where it ends and it hits Killingsworth, there was a strip club out there for the longest time. It's apparently now called the High Society 420 Strip Club.
Really?
Yeah. So I might have to send you there purely for investigative purposes to report for us.
Yeah, I mean, it's not like I go to strip clubs on a weekly basis with the Who's the Ross team for the after party.
No. That's the thing is, Dan, you'd be able to actually evaluate it fairly. That's what I'm saying. You've been to so many of them.
Oh, absolutely.
Now, tell us about what we got for a tune today here, because I'm thinking this looks like one pretty cool remix.
Yeah, this is, as everybody knows, I spend a lot of my free time just scouring the net, finding good music. And this one, I've got a lot of his music. This is from Mad Nick's Mustang. You can just search him on SoundCloud or any number of sites. This is just such a cool thing. We're actually going to try to talk karaoke from hell into doing this. It is the music track from Jimi Hendrix' Fire with the vocal track of The Doors' Light My Fire.
Really cool. I love those mashups like that.
Oh, and it works so well. Like, people are going to be like bopping their heads to this. I can tell you that.
All right, well, let's check it out. This is Mad Mix. Who is this? Mad Mix. Can't see the name. Mad Mix Mustang. There we go. Mad Mix Mustang with Let Me Light Your Fire, Jim and Jimmy. Thanks a lot, Bacon Dan. We'll see you soon.
Sounds good, buddy.
You know that it would be untrue. You know that I would be a liar if I was to say to you, girl, we couldn't get much higher. Come on, baby, light my fire. Come on, baby, light my fire. Come on, baby, light my fire. Try to set the night on fire.
Listen here, baby. Let's stop acting so crazy.
The time to hesitate is through. No time to wallow in the mire. Try now, we can only lose, and our love become a funeral pyre. Come on, baby, light my fire. Come on, baby, light my fire. Come on, baby, light my fire. Try to set the night on fire.
That's what I'm talking about. Now dig this. Yeah. Ha. Now listen, baby.
The time to hesitate is through. No time to wallow in the mire. Try now, we can only lose, and our love become a funeral pyre. Come on, baby, light my fire. Come on, baby, light my fire. Come on, baby, light my fire. Try to set the night on fire. You know that it will be untrue. You know that I would be a liar if I was to say to you, girl, we couldn't get much higher. Yeah. Try to set the night on fire.
You better move over, baby.
Try to set the night on fire.
I ain't gonna rush you, baby.
Try to set the night on fire.
I ain't talking about your lady.
Try to set the night on fire.
Come on, baby, light my fire.
Come on, baby, light my fire.
Yeah, baby.
.420 Radio, the activist radio station. At Herbie's Cannabis Seeds, we pride ourselves on bringing you the best quality seeds from the world's most respected cannabis seed producers, all at the lowest online prices. You can find Herbie's Seeds at herbiesheadshop.com. All cannabis seeds are sold as souvenirs and as a means of preserving cannabis genetics. Herbie's Seeds in no way intends to condone, promote, or incite the use of illegal or controlled substances. We strongly urge all prospective customers to check their national laws prior to placing an order. Herbie's Seeds at herbiesheadshop.com. Proud sponsors of the Russ Belville Show and 420 Radio.
Based upon my experience, as Anthony said, as a former federal prosecutor, Navy JAG attorney, criminal defense attorney in the Navy, and then as a judge, trial court judge in a pretty conservative county in Orange, it just became apparent to me that what we were doing with regard to our nation's drug policy simply was not working. So as Anthony said, I did something very unusual for a sitting trial court judge, and that is I held a press conference, I don't know of any other judge that's done this, stating my views that in effect we've got to change away from this failed policy because it just isn't working. Thereafter, and that was in April the 8th of 1992, so it's been, my goodness, a long time, 32-something years. Since that time, I've changed my mind. No, I now say, when I talk to Rotary clubs, religious groups, or any other groups, that drug prohibition is the biggest failed policy in the history of the United States of America, second only to slavery. And it is. And I'm going to disagree with Alex. There's no such thing as a lowly activist. It's incumbent on us all as citizens of our country to do at least three things. One is to pay our taxes within reason. Another is to not be a voter, but to be an intelligent voter. Look into the issues and be a knowledgeable voter, which is really important. And the third is to make the system work. Look, folks, it's our government, and if it's not working, it's our responsibility to make it better. And so there's no such thing as a lowly activist. You need to stand up for what you believe is right in whatever area that you are interested in. So as you can imagine, and I've been speaking about this publicly for quite a while, some of the introductions I've received are a lot less glamorous than the one you heard here from Anthony. I remember one in particular early on that was quite a bit shorter, and I can actually recite it verbatim. And it was, I know you all want to hear the latest dope from the courthouse, so here's Judge Gray. But now people are beginning to understand from a variety of ways. I talk to Rotary clubs or religious political groups, whatever now, and say, look, don't listen to what I say. Forget about my experience. Use your own. In fact, tell me in your questions an area that is of interest to you, close to your heart. And I will show you to your satisfaction how it is made worse because of our nation's policy of drug prohibition. And it can be medicinal, it can be educational, it can be health care, it can be the environment, criminal justice issues, whatever it is, it's made worse because of drug prohibition. Today, the biggest oxymoron in our world is the term controlled substances. Why? Because as soon as you prohibit something, you give up all of your control to the bad guys. Anything dealing with quality control, which is a huge issue, or place of sale, or price, or age restrictions, you give it up to the bad guys. So I'll tell you my journey. I started just collecting articles, just thinking about this, watching in my own courtroom how we are churning low-level drug offenders through the system for no good purpose whatsoever. You could arrest and even convict a big-time seller of cocaine or whatever in Santa Monica, Costa Mesa, wherever, and does that mean that now cocaine is no longer available? No, it's just an employment opportunity for someone else. So you then look at it really closely and see that we couldn't do it worse if we tried, because yes, the drugs can be harmful, without question. However, the bigger problem is drug money. The drug money is killing people off in Colombia. In fact, I sat on a plane next to a young lady who came here from Colombia at an early age. And look what it's done to her country. Look what it's done to Mexico. You know, you have these beheadings, for heaven's sakes, and this corruption has nothing to do with drugs whatsoever. It's all drug money that does this. So you get people to begin to understand. I am here to give you a prognostication, a forecast, and that is in the state of California, we will have on the ballot in 2016 an initiative to regulate and control the sale of recreational marijuana. It's going to happen, and if we do our job anywhere close to right, it's going to pass. It will be a watershed. At that point, I believe that marijuana prohibition virtually nationwide will be over because the federal government will not be able to internalize the loss of the state of California. And then let's go to the answer. And what, you don't find the answer very often in the world, but the answer is the concept of federalism. I go and talk again with people and say, hey, how many people here feel the federal government has all the answers? You don't have anybody raising their hands. So how many people, do you believe that as adults in the state of Oregon, that you have the ability best to protect and serve your people here with regard to the issue of drugs and drug prohibition and drug regulation? And they all say yes. So in fact, if Oregon comes up with something that works pretty well and the neighboring state of Idaho comes up with something that doesn't, they might look around and say, well, you know, what we're doing, Charlie, isn't working but look what they're doing in Oregon. That works pretty well. Let's gravitate over toward that, because it's important to try different concepts. We couldn't do it worse if we tried. I promise you, you won't do it any worse than the federal government has. So use your own expertise, use your own background and regulation. Now, I do not favor the legalization of any of these drugs. I don't. But it's a question of concepts, a question of language. We hear these different words. Decriminalization, by the way, means, like in Holland or Portugal, that it's still illegal to buy, use, possess, sell any of these drugs. But As long as you stay within very well-known guidelines, the police are instructed, frequently in writing, not to enforce the law. Well, I'm a judge. I believe in having reasonable laws, and I believe in enforcing those laws, but at least what they're doing is far better than what we are doing. But if you're talking about the legalization of drugs, think aspirin. You know, aspirin is a legalized drug. You can advertise it on the open market. Your 12-year-old daughter can go to your local pharmacy and buy a case of it if she wants to. I don't want that to happen for marijuana or any of these other drugs. Alcohol, which is my drug of choice, no. So I believe in the strict regulation and control of these various drugs, kind of like tobacco, kind of like alcohol. I personally do not want marijuana or any other of these drugs, methamphetamines, whatever, to be advertised where children are going to glamorize them. I don't like that idea at all. By the way, are you familiar with this group called a partner? I have to put my hand over my heart. It's just so close and warming. This Partnership for a Drug-Free America. Do you know who the original sponsors were for the Partnership of a Drug-Free America? The alcohol industry and the tobacco industry. Drug-free indeed. But it's brilliant marketing because they did not want the competition from marijuana. So from a marketing standpoint, they're right on tune. As far as a policy standpoint, it's just diabolical. By the way, do you know who the main sponsor is today of the Partnership for a Drug-Free America? The pharmaceutical industry. Hey, what do you know? Okay, it's money, folks. It's just money. It's money that dictates what this policy is and has been. We're talking huge amounts of money. Soon after I started doing this, we actually had a conference at the Hoover Institute in Stanford University. Milton Friedman was there. Joe McNamara, former chief of police of Kansas City and San Jose, was there. And we had 3 different conferences and invited chiefs of police to come into this conference from around the country. And as soon as the doors were closed and the public microphones were turned off, even back in about 1994, half of them agreed pretty much with what we were saying. But then they'd look at us, and you need to know this, activists. They would say, I cannot say what I understand and have seen and believe because I have many masters. You know, I have to respond to the city, to the mayor. I have to respond to the city council. I have to respond to the various editorial boards of these local papers. And if I said what I understand, I'd lose my job. So I need political cover. That's where we come in. We have to regulate and control and legalize, as it were, the discussion, because today there is still a prohibition on discussion. And I look back in my time as a judge, and there are still several opportunities in which I remember, hey, there was about 4 young men, as I understand it, as I recall, that were being sentenced for being under the influence of methamphetamines. In California, it was and still is a mandatory minimum sentence of 90 days in jail for being under the influence of a narcotic or methamphetamines. So they had to give me what we call a factual basis. They had to put into their own words why they were guilty of this offense. And all 4, in various ways, said, Your Honor, my drug of choice is marijuana. And I'd buy my marijuana from the same person for years. However, one fine day, they sold me some marijuana laced with methamphetamines. I didn't know it. I smoked it and got hooked. And I keep thinking to myself, you wonder why I'm doing this? I keep thinking to myself, we all know that smoking cigarettes is not hazard to your health, but at least when you go to your local mini-mart and buy a pack of Marlboros, you're going to know it's not laced with methamphetamines. This is a drug prohibition problem. So we have to get these words out. Look, when it comes down to it as well, it's a question of liberty. The criminal justice system is really good at holding people accountable for what they do. But they're not good at all, nor should they be, of controlling what we as adults put into our bodies. It makes as much sense to me to put this gifted actor Robert Downey Jr. in jail for his heroin problem, and so far he's doing pretty well, but he will always have that craving. He's going to have to be careful. But it makes as much sense to me to put Robert Downey Jr. in jail for his heroin problem as it would have Betty Ford in jail for her alcohol problem. It's the same thing, isn't it? It's a medical problem. Bring them closer to medical professionals that can help them instead of labeling them automatic criminals and pushing them farther away. It's simply that question. So it's a question of liberty. It's a question of also doing what works. And it's also a question, by thunder, of getting the federal government and the governments themselves out of our personal lives. Out of our personal lives. They are encroaching upon our freedoms. So much. Why? Well, I tell you, big government is really, really good and effective at least one thing, and that is increasing the size, the power, the funding of big government. And they're continuing to get more involved in our lives. The answer is no. The answer is no. What is the soul of the United States of America? There's still people from anywhere around the world that still love America. They still love Americans. They'd give an awful lot to be a part of America. They may not be all that proud or happy of our government. Then again, neither am I. But what makes us special? Why is it that so many people want to come here? And the answer is the soul of our country is our freedoms and our liberties. And today our very soul is under attack by our very own government. And it's up to us to stand up and say, no, this will not happen. I talk with various groups of immigrants, for example, from Russia, from Iraq, from Vietnam. And they look aghast at what is happening now in our country. They fled from governments that intrude. They have that knock on the door and searching without warrants and nighttime raids and people disappearing or being taken into custody without a warrant. And that's what I fled from to come to the United States. And now they look around and see that's where our government is going, and no one is saying anything about it. I wrote a book, finally, I'd gotten so much information that I had to with regard to the war on drugs. It's probably the longest book title you've ever heard of, Why Our Drug Laws Have Failed and What We Can Do About It, a judicial indictment of the war on drugs. I cited numbers of other judges, even back in 2001 when it was originally printed, commenting about the failed war on drugs. But I have an entire chapter of the erosion of our civil liberties, citing only United States Supreme Court cases involving drugs, how the erosion of our Fourth Amendment against search and seizure has been rampant in our country today. And it's so easy to give up our rights and so hard to get them back. The war on drugs is the biggest reason for our loss of civil liberties probably in our country's history, although the so-called war on terror is now giving that a run for its money as well. But the government emphasizes fear. They keep us in fear. And if you're going to have a war on drugs, that means you've got to vilify the enemy, don't you? And who is it? Oh, it's those hippies. Oh, it's those druggies. Now, I don't use the word hype. I don't use the word, down and out or any of the rest of this stuff. It vilifies people. People are human beings, and they have drug problems. My daughter is bipolar. She's going to turn 40 years old in December. And she told me a while ago that, Dad, the only time I really feel normal is when I'm using methamphetamines. And that's a true problem. It's a true addiction problem. And she's had some problems. She's doing fairly well now, but who knows. But so many other people are as well. Already in this conference, I've heard about 3 or 4 different couples, different people, talking about their family problems and exacerbated by the war on drugs. You may remember a fellow by the name of Jeb Bush, who was, as governor of Florida, it was become pretty well known. Of course, he was a political figure, and he had 2 twin daughters that had, as it was publicly revealed, problems with regard to prescription drugs and addictions. And he came out on the airwaves and said, this is a family emergency. We need treatment and we need privacy. And my heart goes out to him, and he's right. He needed treatment and he needed privacy. But if it's us, we need treatment and we need privacy. But if it's them, they need prison. And guess who the them is? Mostly people of color, mostly the down and out, mostly the people of lower economic areas. And the answer is no, that is not what our country stands for. It does not take a sociologist to go through any jail or prison in our country and see that people of color are vastly overrepresented. The answer is no. We cannot do this. The United States of America leads the world in the incarceration of our people, both by sheer numbers as well as per capita. There's a guy named Jim Webb, who was a Democratic senator from Virginia, and he was seen on the cover of Parade magazine. He's worthy of applause. He was seen on the cover of Parade magazine citing these statistics, and then with the great comment that either the United States of America is the most evil people in the world or we're doing something wrong. What do you think it is? We need treatment. They need prison. So we need to come back to the fundamental approach of the criminal justice system, and that is hold people accountable for their actions. We're pretty good at that. However, if I were to be selling marijuana illegally, and you come to me with $20 in your hand, and I have a baggie of $20 worth of marijuana, I'm not going to turn you in. I'm not going to arrest you. I'm not going to call the police because you're doing what I want to. You're my customer, and you're not going to turn me in either. And so, in order to break that bond, you've got to get down in the gutter if you're in the law enforcement business. In order to interfere between these voluntary transactions, you're going to have wiretap, you're going to have an informant, you're going to have an undercover officer, and then that brings all kinds of problems. The government is not good at controlling what we as adults put into our bodies, nor should they be. It's none of their business. So we get back to that. Talk about Robert Downey Jr., Betty Ford, or whatever. Whatever they put into their body, bring them, if they're causing medical problems for themselves, and they could be, bring them closer to the medical professionals that can help them. But leave them alone otherwise, unless, if Robert Downey Jr., Betty Ford, you or I drive a motor vehicle impaired by, you name it, marijuana, alcohol, my drug of choice, methamphetamines, whatever, that's a crime and should be. What's the difference? The answer is now, by my actions, I'm putting your safety at risk. Legitimate criminal justice function. But they have no business controlling what I, as an adult, put into my body. Now, I'm going to fly home tonight. I'm going to have dinner with my wife. And I could drink 10 martinis if I wanted to. Clearly not medically a smart thing to do. Certainly medically harmful. But not a violation of law, nor should it be. So let's get this word out. Marijuana is a viable medicine. Marijuana is a viable recreational drug, and it is used responsibly by virtually everybody. And if they're used irresponsibly to the detriment of other people, bring in the criminal justice system. But otherwise, get out of our lives. No such thing as a lowly activist. And there are just so many other issues as well. I was proud, as Anthony said, to be the vice presidential nominee, vice presidential candidate in 2012. I believed in Governor Gary Johnson, who, I'd been doing this for a while, never heard of him. He was a two-term Republican governor of New Mexico. And I opened up my newspaper in 1999 and found that, hey, who is this governor of New Mexico? He says he has conducted what he called his own audit and determined that the war on drugs is not working and we've got to put our heads together and change it. I thought, wow, he had no political constituency for that, no political benefit. In fact, he took on a whole lot of political problems. He did the right thing for the right reason. So as soon as he started running for president, I started saying, he's the most qualified person to be president I know of. I guess I said it a few too many times, so he asked me to be his running mate, so now what am I going to do? But I just believed in that. We need to bring in responsibility at all levels of our society, and that starts with government. Responsibility movement is what we need to get back to at all levels. Personal, of course. Corporate, absolutely. Government, certainly so. And we need to do this, and we need to do it right away. We're going in the wrong direction in so many areas. Our children, look, you can go into a barrio or an area, and people will understand, basically, that there are only so many Michael Jordans, only so many Kobe Bryants or whatever. So my chances of going into the NBA or the NFL, realistically, are not that good. So we might as well take out billboards for our young people. Hey, you want to make some money? You will never, ever make as much money in your life as you can by selling drugs. We are misleading our youth completely. Gangs, I've seen this in juvenile court. Juvenile street gangs use this as a recruiting tool. Hey, you want to make some money? Join our gang and help be involved to sell drugs. We will cripple really bad organizations by regulating and controlling these various drugs. One of the biggest purveyors, suppliers of methamphetamines are the Hells Angels. Oh, what a nice group. Personally, you may not remember this. It was about 15, 20 years ago that the government of Korea had a ship that they were sending to the West, and it was filled with methamphetamines, and we found it and were able to intercept that shipment. But it so happens, at least in my belief, the sale of illegal drugs funded their whole nuclear policy. It's huge money. So the drugs are here to stay. Tell people that. You know, we've tried to make them illegal, but there's never been any people that have not had some form of mind-altering, sometimes addicting substances to use, to misuse, to abuse, and maybe even get addicted to, except maybe the Eskimo, because they couldn't grow anything, but now chemistry has changed that as well. So I bring you bad tidings. We've tried to make them illegal. They have always been with us, and they always will. And that means they're going to bring in harms, without question. So let's adopt a policy that is to reduce the harms that can and will be caused by these drugs in our communities. And then you start looking at the drug money. You start looking at going into Mexico and these beheadings. Once again, it's not caused with drugs. It doesn't have anything to do with drugs. It's all drug money. And as a practical reality, we could bulldoze the entire country of Colombia, Peru. You can take Mexico with it if you want to. It won't make any difference at all with regard to our illegal drug problems here. Why? Because the reality is, if the demand is here, the demand will be met. If you figuratively have somebody standing on a street corner with a $20 bill in his hand saying, hey, give me $20 of cocaine or marijuana or whatever, somebody will fill that market. And if it's not done by Colombia, Peru, and Mexico, it'll be done by Nigeria or Afghanistan. Or, by the way, California. Do you know what the largest cash crop is today in the state of California? It's marijuana. Number 2 is grapes, okay? So you realize, hey, if you have this out there, somebody is using it. And we have really harmed ourselves by keeping marijuana illegal. I am completely convinced. I've never smoked marijuana, like we said. I'm completely convinced that medical marijuana is a viable medicine, and it's increasingly being proved. I was one time in Marin County, it's north of San Francisco in California, and was at a medical marijuana clinic, and arbitrarily went up to some young man who was in line for his, as he called it, his medicine. And I introduced myself and said, well, what is your story? Why are you here? He said, well, Your Honor, about 9 months ago, I was involved in a motorcycle collision and did real violence to my spine. So my medical doctor had me so pumped full of narcotics, I was in a haze, I basically couldn't function, and I was having about 5 or 6 seizures a day. That went on for several months until a friend of mine said, try medical marijuana. He said, what do I have to lose? So he did. And since that time, he has weaned himself off all of the narcotics. He's able to live pretty much a normal life, and he maybe has 1 or 2 seizures a week. I think to myself, wow, what are we doing here? So the whole medical marijuana field, and honestly, CBD oil is going to be a medical revolution in our country, I really believe. It will be. Get the word out. And hemp, for heaven's sake. You know, you can make a difference between marijuana and hemp just by definition. You know, let's say a THC of, 0.3% or less is hemp. Treat it like cotton. And I was on a radio talk show, this is quite a few years ago, out of Iowa, and a farmer came on and said, well, Judge Gray, I'm going to talk against we're talking about ethanol, and I'm going to talk against my own economic self-interest because I raise corn. However, you can get more ethanol from an acre of hemp than you can an acre of corn, and the hemp will not clog your carburetor, but the corn will. I thought, you know, that's not my field, but the market will figure this out. Why do we have the federal government dictating that, yes, we have to use ethanol in the first place, and it must be used with corn? You know, why? Well, crony capitalism. That's the idea. You have a whole lot of agricultural folks in Iowa, Illinois, or Indiana, or wherever that want to get this extra market for their crops, which, by the way, has the cost of raising the cost of tortillas and all the rest. Get the market out, get the government out of this. So another secret. We have so much money in government today, don't we? With all of these lobbyists and all of this stuff. And we always will, until you will never get money out of government until you get government out of money. Get the government out of these organizations and you won't have these lobbyists. The big one, of course, is taxes. You know, you look at the complications of this tax system. If we were to go to a flat tax, one that was understandable, simple, straightforward, what would happen? Well, you would lose all these lobbyists because they'd have nowhere to go. If you want to get rid of lobbyists, go to a flat tax, and that'll take care of about 60% of the lobbyists in Washington already. So there's several groups against simplifying our tax system. Who are they? Well, H&R Block is not interested. You know, the tax attorneys, accountants and stuff, they're not. I understand that's our system and that's fine. Others are the people that work for the IRS. Okay, I think we can live with that. But the major powerful group that is against this change is members of Congress. Why? Because today they get enormous political power by voting for tax breaks for their wealthy constituents, and they do not want to give it up. Again, government keeps getting bigger and bigger. You get money out of government by getting government out of money. So these are all things that we can do. Their help is on the way. You need to be revitalized. It's really fun to be able to speak with good activist people. And I'm here to tell you that some of the best people I've ever met in my life, I have met because of my involvement in drug policy reform. Some of them have been to prison. Some of them are still drug addicted. Others are like me that don't use any of these illegal substances, etc. But it's really amazing. Yes, I even speak for LEAP, which is Law Enforcement Against Prohibition. And one of the people that actually I helped bring in is the former chief deputy of the Los Angeles Police Department. Not exactly any man's liberal, okay? He's got all the badges and all the guns and everything else. But, you know, from that perspective, nobody can argue with Steve Downing. I mean, he's done there. He's not a liberal. He's not coddling anybody. He just realizes what we're doing isn't working. And so it's been amazing to see. I wouldn't be here speaking with you folks except for my involvement in drug policy reform. It's just an amazing thing. It's a very exciting thing. It's going to be a revolution in our country to get the government out of our lives in this fashion, get the government out of that money, regulate and control these various drugs according to however each state decides how this should happen. I'm going to tell you another couple of stories. I was in juvenile court for a while on the Abused and Neglected Children calendar. And maybe every 5 weeks or so, I would have the following factual scenario come into my court. There'd be a mother, single mother, let's say of 2 children, and she'd make a big mistake. Namely, she'd hook up with the wrong boyfriend. And so the boyfriend was out there selling drugs, and she'd basically know it, but that's the way the cards were dealt. So one fine day, he would come to her and say, well, tell you what, Helen, if you'll take this package across town and give it to Charlie, I'll pay you $500 or so. And so she'd think, well, it probably is narcotics, but, you know, I'm going that way anyway, and I could use this for half my month's rent. So she would do it. Okay, so she gets arrested, charged, convicted, and sentenced to, say, 5 years in prison. And unfortunately, in today's world, 5 years in prison for transporting 3 or 4 ounces of heroin is probably not an unrealistic charge. So let me ask you a question. When you incarcerate the mother, what happens to her children? And the answer to that question is easy. She has legally abandoned her children because she's off in prison. So they come to me on the Abused and Neglected Children calendar. So now I have the mother, and she's sitting there in handcuffs and in a jail jumpsuit. And I look at her and tell her the truth, which is, of course, ma'am, you know you're not going to be a functional part of your children's lives for the next 5 years. She starts to well up with tears. Wouldn't you? And then I look at her and tell her the brutal truth, which is, unless you're really lucky and either have a personal friend or family member that's both willing and able to take custody of your children, they're probably going to be adopted by somebody else by the time you get out of prison. And she starts to dissolve.
The most excellent Judge Jim Gray speaking at the Oregon Medical Marijuana Business Conference. His speech was Saturday, and we'll have these archived up at my SoundCloud page, soundcloud.com/RadicalRuss. But folks, time flies when you legalize. That's all the time we got for today, but join us tomorrow for another 2 hours of news and interviews you can use for the cannabis community. We got some data, we got some opinion, we got some music, we got plenty. Every weekday at 3 p.m. Pacific Time, replays at 6 p.m., 3 a.m., and 6 a.m. Pacific Time. Also, catch all 5 shows replayed on Saturdays, starting at 3 p.m. Pacific Time. The entire schedule can be found at 420radio.org/schedule. For everyone here at beautiful legal Potland, Oregon's Rolla J Studios, I'm Radical Russ. Until next time, take care of each other, tokers.
This is the Russ Belville Show. The Russ Belville Show is blogging and podcasting daily at radicalruss.com.
You take a seed, you plant it, you grow it, you dry it, you roll it, you smoke it. You take a seed, you plant it, you grow it, you dry it, you roll it, you smoke it. You take a seed, you plant it, you grow it, you dry it, you roll it, you smoke it, and it goes down smooth. Hey!
Welcome 420 radio fans to the Activism Hour. I'm Russ Belville, and I founded 420 Radio intending to provide a public radio platform for the hard-working volunteer activists I meet every month from all across the country and around the world. The Activism Hour features videos from the people who make up the grassroots organizations fighting for an end to adult marijuana prohibition. Please learn more about these groups and send them your donations to bring the dream of cannabis freedom to all 50 states and across the globe. Today, you'll see videos from NORML, the National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws, at normal.org, Law Enforcement Against Prohibition at leap.cc, Students for Sensible Drug Policy at ssdp.org, the Marijuana Policy Project at mpp.org, Americans for Safe Access at safeaccessnow.org, High Times Magazine at hightimes.com, River Rock, Colorado at riverrockcolorado.com, and magicalbutter.com, makers of the Magical Butter Botanical Extractor. Now, on to the program, and thank you for your support of marijuana activism and 420radio.org.
Numbers have never really been my strength, but more and more I'm realizing how important numbers are to our mission of reforming cannabis policy here in the South. So today I'd like to discuss the number 10,000. Why that number? 10,000 is my personal goal for the second Dallas Marijuana March. Last year we had around 3,000 people, although depending on what news network you were watching, you may have been informed that there was closer to 4,000 or even 5,000 people. The fact is, we had really around 3,000 people. And so my personal goal this year is 10,000 Texans marching through the streets of downtown Dallas, demanding that their elected representatives see, hear, and comprehend our plight. Enough Texans have suffered this failed social experiment of prohibition, and our elected leaders have wasted our time on this topic for the last legislative session. To reach 10,000 Texans, we need to be able to advertise our marijuana march like never before. The first time we did something like this was when we purchased a billboard, and we saw a jump in attendance of our global marijuana march from 400 people to 3,500 people the next year. So clearly advertising this stuff to Texans works. That said, this year we've set our sights on a local television commercial on a mainstream network, and depending on the time of day or night, this will cost us between $1,500 and $10,000. So, we're getting creative with fundraising this year by hosting our first ever retro video game tournament on Monday, September 14th in Arlington, where participants will pay $20 or $50 to race, brawl, or blast their way to the top for first dibs on some truly, truly fabulous prizes, such as a $250 Visa gift card donated by one of our very generous and very new members, as well as glass water pipes that are so rare you would not be able to purchase them from the internet or even any store in Texas. We have oil rigs and vaporizers and more that have been donated by businesses that support our organization and your rights as cannabis consumers to access this plant and to have policies that make sense and that are in alignment with the rest of the country. We need you to help us make this commercial a reality. This can happen if we work together. We've already been in touch with multiple stations, and they are willing to put a marijuana commercial out there if we're willing to pay for it. The question is, are you willing to stand up and be counted with us? Are you willing to donate to us? Are you willing to give from your heart, from your pocketbook, and from your time to help us make marijuana legalization a reality in Texas? This month, DFW Normal is doing that with a retro video game tournament. Next month, it will be with a march. The month after that is a surprise. But please, stop watching, start getting involved, and together we will end cannabis prohibition in the state of Texas once and for all. Herb's the word.
As a police officer, I walked the beat, served on the Vice Squad and SWAT team, and became an expert on drug addiction. I saw firsthand the effects of Ohio's destructive marijuana laws. Simply put, they don't work. Ohio spends over $100 million each year on this failed effort. It's time for marijuana reform, so law enforcement can spend their time cracking down on real criminals and making Ohio a safer place for our families. Vote yes on 3.
We're going to show you how to make magical butter cooking oil in just 4 easy steps. The ingredients that you'll need for this recipe are 2 to 5 cups of coconut or grapeseed oil, 7 to 28 grams per cup of high-quality botanicals, and 1 tablespoon per cup of lecithin. Before you begin, you must decarboxylate your herbs in order to activate the essential ingredients. Click here to view our video on decarboxylation. Now it's time to add your ingredients to your machine. Start by adding your whole herbs to the pitcher. Pour your cooking oil over your herbs. Finish with your lecithin. Lecithin is a great emulsifier and enriches your extraction. Now, secure the head back onto your machine. For this magical butter recipe, you will set your temperature to 160 degrees Fahrenheit or 71 degrees Celsius, then press the 1-hour oil button. And that's it. The magical butter machine will mix, stir, grind, and infuse your oil without any hassle. After the cycle is complete, remove the head of the appliance and put on your heat-resistant silicone love glove. Then pour the contents of your pitcher slowly into your purified filter bag, holding it over the container of your choice. Give your filter a gentle squeeze to ensure you get all of that oily goodness. Your freshly made magical butter cooking oil will keep in the refrigerator for 3 to 6 months. To see more of our excellent recipes made possible with our magical butter machine, visit magicalbutter.com.
420 Radio, fighting prohibition since 2012. Imagine life without taxes. Let New Era Certified Public Accountants, NewEraCPAs.com, handle your Cannabusiness 280E and tax strategy. Get your business prepared with New Era CPA's Cannabis Finance Bootcamp. NewEraCPAs.com, with years of experience in the industry, we are one of the nation's leading accounting firms for growers, dispensaries, and ancillary companies from Washington to California. NewEraCPAs.com.
We're going to show you how to make cannabis tincture in the magical butter machine. The ingredients you'll need for this recipe are 2 to 5 cups of 150 to 190 proof grain alcohol, and 7 to 14 grams per cup of high-quality botanicals. Before you begin, you must decarboxylate your herb in order to activate the essential ingredients. Click here to view our video on decarboxylation. Now it's time to add your ingredients to your machine. Start by adding your whole herbs to the pitcher. Now pour your grain alcohol over your herbs. For this magical butter recipe, you will set the temperature to 160 degrees Fahrenheit or 71 degrees Celsius. Then press the 4-hour tincture button. For higher altitude climates, set your temperature to 130 degrees Fahrenheit. And that's it. The magical butter machine will mix, stir, grind, and infuse your tincture without any hassle. After the cycle is complete, remove the head of the appliance and put on your heat-resistant silicone love glove. Then pour the contents of your pitcher slowly into your purified filter bag, holding it over the container of your choice. Give your filter a gentle squeeze to ensure you get all of your extraction. Your freshly made cannabis tincture will keep in the refrigerator for 3 to 6 months. To see more of our excellent recipes made possible with our magical butter machine, visit magicalbutter.com. Marijuana may be legal in some states, but it is still very difficult to advertise. Legal marijuana states have strict guidelines about where marijuana ads may be placed.
420 Radio provides advertisers a marijuana-related on-demand platform skewed toward older adults that meets Colorado and other legal states' advertising restrictions. Visit 420radio.org/advertise to learn how you can place web ads that are immune to ad block software and audio ads heard live on 420 Radio and stored permanently in the enormously popular Russ Belville Show podcast. 420 Radio is heard by legions of dedicated fans who make up the activist leadership and entrepreneurial base of serious marijuana law reformers. Our audience is older, better educated, and more financially secure than most marijuana-related media can boast. Learn more at 420radio.org/advertise. The Russ Belville Show is proudly sponsored by the Marijuana Business Association. The MJBA, called by NBC News the Cannabis Chamber of Commerce, is the fastest growing business association in the fastest growing industry in America. I've been working with the MJBA for years, and I personally invite you to join the MJBA. MJBA also publishes the popular MJ Headline News on Facebook and the MJNewsNetwork.com and Marijuana Channel 1 on YouTube. Visit mjba.net for more details.
Hi, I'm Chef Joey Galliano from MagicalButter.com. And today, we're going to show you how to make chicken and broccoli cheesy pasta. The ingredients you'll need for this recipe are 1/2 cup of magical butter, 1 pound of cooked and diced chicken, 6 ounces of cooked and chopped broccoli florets, 1 pound of cooked protein pasta, 4 ounces of extra sharp cheddar cheese, 4 ounces of Gruyere cheese, and 4 ounces of pepper jack cheese. 1/2 cup of chicken broth, 1/2 cup of dry white wine, 1/2 of a red onion minced, 1 shallot minced, 3 to 4 cloves of garlic minced, 1 tablespoon of flour, 1 cup of panko breadcrumbs, and 1/4 cup of Parmesan cheese. To view our magical butter recipe, click this link. Now I'm going to do something that pleases me and make this pasta so cheesy. Let's get this recipe popping. The first thing that we're going to do is get a saute pan on medium-high heat and begin to melt our magical butter. Once our magical butter is completely melted, we're going to add our breadcrumbs. Cook and stir your breadcrumbs until they're a golden brown. Then add your Parmesan cheese, mix, and set aside. Now onto our cheese sauce. Grab a large saute pan and put it on medium-high heat and begin to melt your magical butter. Once your magical butter is melted, add your onions and shallots. Add a little salt and pepper and cook for 3 to 4 minutes or until golden brown. Now add your garlic, stir constantly and cook for another 2 minutes. Add your flour, whisk, and cook for 1 to 2 minutes or until a nice golden brown starts to occur. Now we're going to deglaze our pan by adding our wine and our chicken broth. We're going to whisk and let it cook for about 1 minute. Add your milk and cream cheese and stir for 30 seconds. Now it's time to add your cheeses one at a time, whisking constantly until your sauce is completely combined. Okay, our cheese sauce is completed and looking beautiful. Now it's time to build this dish. Place your pasta in a large bowl and add 3/4 of your cheese sauce. Give a quick mix and then fold in your chicken and broccoli. Pour the contents of your bowl into a baking dish, spread the remainder of your cheesy sauce over your pasta, and cover with breadcrumbs. And now it's time to bake. Preheat your oven to 325 degrees Fahrenheit and bake for 15 to 20 minutes. Once the time is up, this recipe is completed. Take your dish out of the oven, serve and enjoy. This recipe is easy and delicious, and guaranteed to leave everybody who eats it with a cheese-eating grin. For this and all of our other awesome recipes, click onto this link. I'm Chef Joey Galliano from MagicalButter.com, and as always, thank you for watching. And don't forget, subscribe to our YouTube channel. Cheers to goodness.
Magical butter, magical butter. 420 Radio, your ticket to the Boston Freedom Rally.
My name is Mustafa Sabur. Grew up in Northwest Washington, D.C. I grew up at the height of the war on drugs in the 80s and early part of the 90s. The war on drugs impacted me in many ways as a youngster growing up in the inner city. I, at some point, got lost in drug culture, ended up getting arrested. My first arrest was possession with intent to distribute, and ended up doing about a year in prison in Lawton, Virginia. And that led me down a path where I ended up doing nearly 19 years of my life in and out of jails and prisons as a result to the war on drugs. I think this war on drugs impacted young people in such a way where, particularly in the African American community, a lot of undereducated children, underprivileged children, had no means of employment. They grew up in poor families, and as a result, this culture, it swallowed up a lot of children. Some were murdered. As you know, D.C. was once known as the murder capital of the United States. And during this time, I know myself particularly, I was in a single-parent home, and the struggle to survive sometimes can allow children to they come together in their peers. You know, they become victims of peer pressure. I was one of those victims. But after doing so much time in prison, that was one of the things that I turned to was spirituality, to try to find myself. But as I grew and became a young man, unfortunately I grew up in prison, but as I grew and became a young man, I understood that my life had come full circle. And from a spiritual perspective, later on in life I wanted to give back because my experiences in life had led me to a point where I felt I had something to offer. And so for that I'm thankful to reach back and try to save some of the younger children who are growing up in the generation after myself.
Oregon has joined Washington and Colorado in legalizing marijuana. We're Portland NORML, the national organization for the reform of marijuana laws chapter in Portland, Oregon. Join us as we celebrate the launch of an exciting new era in marijuana freedom in Oregon. Our job has just begun. Powerful interests want to white out the most important portions of Oregon's legalization law. By joining Portland NORML, you add your voice to the thousands who voted for Measure 91 and want it to be implemented as written. The people have spoken. Now it is time for the legislature to obey the will of the people. Find out more about Portland NORML at portlandnormal.org. Attend our monthly membership meetings on the fourth Saturday of the month. See our website for more details. Portland NORML, ensuring responsible adult marijuana consumers are afforded the same rights, privileges, and responsibilities as beer drinkers.
My name is Fred Morris. I have been a United Methodist preacher for 61 years. I started when I was 19 years old. I'm now 81. I'm still preaching in California. I spent 33 of those years in Latin America, in Brazil, Costa Rica, Nicaragua, Panama. For a number of years in Costa Rica, I was, in addition to the other things I did, I was a stringer for ABC News. And that got me into a position where at one time, we had a camera crew out on a farmer's landing strip in northern Costa Rica. This farmer was a covert, deep plant CIA agent, and we got out to his farm, and there was a Cessna 310, a very expensive 2-engine airplane sitting on his runway, with a pilot sitting in it, just sort of killing time. And with a cameraman, we went up and asked him what he was doing. He said he had just brought down a load of weapons for the Contra, Reagan's Contra. This was in 1984. And he was waiting for a load of cocaine to take back to Arkansas. And he said he was a contract employee of the CIA, which told me a great deal about the war on drugs, when our government was actually smuggling drugs into the United States in exchange for weapons for Reagan's project in Central America. I'm totally opposed to the war on drugs. I think it's corrupt. It stays in place because it increases the prison population in the United States, particularly among people of color. It keeps them oppressed and many of them out of circulation, and it provides a great deal of money for corrupt people in our government. I've been very deeply impressed with Portugal's treatment of drugs. They have decriminalized all drugs, And over the past 10 years, their drug problems have been cut in half. And they're treating addiction as a health problem, not as a criminal problem. So they don't put people in jail, they treat them. And so they have much less crime around drugs, they have much fewer drugs. And I think that would work very effectively here.
Get.buzz. .buzz is the internet platform that fuels community interest, excitement, and new experiences. .buzz is the premier online destination for internet users seeking the latest news on a variety of topics. .buzz appeals to groups active in blogging, communications, journalism, advertising, and marketing. .buzz offers registrants a stronger alternative to the shrinking namespace of existing top-level domain names, such as .com, .net, and .org. Get your name now at get.buzz.
Yes, may I make one comment before I ask my question, if that's all right? I have a problem with the death, because that man died from blunt force contact with the pavement when he jumped out of the window. And so we don't really know if that amount of cannabis would have killed him, and I suspect it might not have. But that's not my question. That was just bubbling out, so sorry about that. My question is from your point of view, Project SAM and everything, do you all ever consider the damage that's done by giving a teenager or an adult a criminal record, or bashing down a door, or arresting people on the streets, and a bit of over-policing that happens around cannabis? Do you all ever consider that? Because from my perspective, I've been working in criminal justice, that's the biggest problem. It's the criminalization and the police intervention and criminal records and so forth. And, like what happened to Cam's son.
Well, we certainly look at that data. We work very closely with women inmates at the Western Regional Jail down in Roanoke. And those women that are there, they're not there for simple possession. And if you go to the research, it's a very, very...
No, but you can often get arrested for simple possession. And that's often a problem. People lose their jobs just for getting arrested.
Especially if you're a person of color.
And they send SWAT teams in.
Yeah, so I mean, it's not, that's an easy thing to say, and I know that's true. We get that all the time down at the state capitol, but that's not all there is to it. When you make a substance illegal, you have lots of unintended consequences.
There's lots of unintended consequences when we decide that we're going to make another illegal drug legal. And the other piece of this, and that is a discussion that I think is separate from some of this too.
What, regulating? Regulating?
It's a plant. The plant piece.
Okay.
There are pieces of this. Our part of this is we want to prevent addiction. We want to prevent the things that I just talked about happening with 16-year-olds. There are many layers to this piece of substances, okay? And, I think that Marilyn talked about the runner's high. My addiction is I love to work out. I train for endurance triathlons all the time. So I know that runner's high. I know exactly what that is. In fact, part of me thinking about what I was going to say here was on a run 2 days ago, running into the sunset. But what we are trying to do is say, and I totally agree with certain pieces of health that are going to balance out. And I totally agree, we've got an opiate problem. We've got a huge opiate problem. But we've got to look at all those pieces, and we have to say that we've got to prevent this. We've got to prevent even people from wanting to have to use any of this, from then becoming addicted to this. I mean, if you don't need to use it even for medicinal purposes, you don't need to use it.
Do we need to use caffeine?
There's a lot of people that we talk about with there's a lot, we've got an epidemic of diabetes, we've got an epidemic of obesity, we've got an epidemic of heroin. There's a lot of different ways without using a pill or any substance to get healthier. A lot of ways.
420 Radio, freeing your mind 24 hours a day. The Fingerboard Extension has fretted instruments to enhance your creativity. It has new and used guitars and banjos from beginning to high class. The Fingerboard Extension has National Resophonic, Husson Dalton, Larrabee, Heritage and Recording King guitars, and Mike Ramsey, Wildwood, Gold Tone, and Recording King banjos. The Fingerboard Extension also has drum stuff, used gear, and parts. Stop by the Fingerboard Extension, downtown Corvallis, Oregon at 120 Northwest 2nd, or check out the inventory on the web at fingerboardextension.com and reverb.com.
So I haven't promoted it for 6 months, and obviously it is evident of that. So if everybody can, maybe just familiarize yourself with our Spreadshirt account and post a link someplace. And it seems like if you do post something, people like to buy shirts. So and that's a drop ship, so that's real nice that we can just control the commission on it. Somebody places an order, they drop ship it. So we did get 3 members last month of $97 of contributions. 2 new members came online, and then 1 contribution I just solicited. So, and another thing that we were talking about, so the expenses really we had were nominal for the month. It was our PayPal expenses. Except, Gene, I'm going to pick on you again a little bit. If you could, just make sure that if you do any postage for any mailers or anything like that, even if it's just text me or email me the amount, and I'll, if you don't need reimbursement, great, but we'll consider it an in-kind donation. Something that came up in another meeting was logging our time, and then I also had in there mileage. Now that we're going to not an online meeting anymore and we're all traveling here, it's not that Normal is going to reimburse you for getting here, but your gas to get here should be considered an in-kind donation.
Okay, here's my question. What is the advantage of reporting in-kind donations? Does it look good to Normal, or does it benefit us somehow? Or?
Well, the in-kind donations for postage and mailers and expenses and stuff like that, those are expenses that the chapter incurs. So whether you're paying them or not, we need to take care of those, and so we can log them so we know, hey, in the future, if you're not there to pay for postage, we need X amount of postage. Now, the other stuff, the niceties, the logging the time and the mileage, is both for us, our purposes, so we can figure out, what, it does take some time, effort, energy to do this, and for grant writing purposes. Basically, if I turn in a piece of paper that says this, like last month, for example, I turned in my bank account, and the same thing with National Normal. Turning in our bank account, we had no activity. Our beginning balance was the same as our end balance. That's because all of our donations were online. They're still in our PayPal account, and everything we did was an in-kind donation. So if we don't log those in there, we have no, at a piece of paper, which is what grant writers or people who are going to look at a grant do, they're going to look at your piece of paper. If we don't document what we're doing, they don't know what we're doing.
Sure.
So, fair enough?
Yeah, I mean, I probably, some of that stuff you mentioned may not have receipts for, but I remember what it was.
Sure.
This thing.
Right. I say just make it good protocol that, we should have good standard operating procedures, follow Robert's Rules of Orders, especially if we're going to be in a fiduciary role, which is a board of directors role, that just get in a good habit to do it. Expenses incurred, report it. Yes, sir.
Rich and I are currently in communications. We're working on a project where we'll be doing normal, basically YouTube content, normal content we put out on YouTube. That's going to be taking our time and our effort. Do you want us to report that as well?
I think so. Yeah.
Donation, because it is a value.
Again, I've been talking with Kevin on how do we show that as an in-kind donation, because on a spreadsheet it might not show up unless you have $1 per hour charged to it or something like that. But we should, but at some point you have to have that stuff noted. We assume there is some time, effort, energy that needs to be put forth each month in order to do the basic things that we do. But at the same token, if we're not logging those somehow, how do we do them? Whether it's reflected in our treasurer's report or not, that is a whole nother debatable section,
I personally feel we should just leave the treasurer to make the decision if it should be in the report. But I'll get the
I have a spot. I have a spot in there for it, that does log it in there, so that at one touch of a button, at least when I'm looking at it at my treasurer's report, I have everything in there from real donations to real expenses to the PayPal account to this to, I wanted that piece of that document to be all-encompassing, because I only want to share one thing a month with National Normal and or anybody else who's looking at our organization. And like I said, even though it might not be reflected as, because what we've been doing in the past is an in-kind donation would be, you know, you paid $5 for postage, put in $5, itemize it out or reconcile it as an expense, you know? So you don't want to like pad the numbers and say you put in 40 hours on a project at $10 an hour, that's 400 or whatever, because then you might get yourself into a situation where you have way more on paper than what you really took in and out, you know. But that's what our time is, you know. So.
Well, you know, as we haven't had that many members, so it wasn't really an issue. But you know, as we get more members, yeah, I would document it too, just to get reimbursed, you know.
Right.
For a postage, makes sense.
Right. Right. So, like I said, those real-time expenses that are reflected in the chapter are a must-have. I think the mileage is a real-time expense that can be easily noted. Charitable contributions right now are 14.5%, so we're not going to give you or credit that same 55% that the Fed would give you on a tax return type thing. But like if you drove here and it cost you $20 of gas, that should be an in-kind donation. You know? So at least that's what I look at it, because in order to make that thing happen, and a lot of organizations that are doing this, that have a budget and know those types of things, provide stipends for their board of directors in order for those things to happen.
In theory, a person could take that as a 14.5-cent deduction if you're doing that for a nonprofit group, or you don't know.
I'm not a tax advisor, so
I would talk to your tax advisor, but you can at least.
Here's what the tax advisor told me as the treasurer. I only can reimburse you 14.5%. If I was actually reimbursing you for mileage, that is all I can reimburse you. What is your deduction in the long run?
If he doesn't reimburse you, you could do 14.5 cents on your Schedule A section.
Probably.
Line 21, not probably, that's what you
She's a
Okay.
tax professional.
All right. Yeah, okay. So there you go. But so now here's a good question. Not that I would put you on the spot, but that's why you would need to have this, because in order for you to deduct it, I have to give you something that says you did it. Right. Right. So if we're not logging it, you're not getting the deduction.
We don't
anyway.
have enough to deduct at this point, but if it, you know, it's good to get.
I did this full time for 2 years. I would have loved for some organization to give me a piece of paper that said I could deduct something. Right, right. So I think it's important. So now whether we develop some sort of form and make you sign and all that kind of crap, that I don't know yet because I'm not that far. I think at this point, just notify me and I'd put it in our records, our official record, and once we approve it and say this and that, it's pretty much as good
I
as
have
gold.
a feeling once you get enough of those reports together, you're going to realize what you need to keep, and then
Right.
you have an idea of what a form means.
Right, right. But those are things that, talking to like Drug Policy Alliance and their grant writing people, those are all those little niches that everybody takes advantage of. Now, it's only cents to us, but at some point this needs to be dollars, and then it doesn't matter. So, okay, moving on to the next one. So, there's our online members. I just spoke to myself too soon. Website stuff. Jesse, you're up. What do you got for us? Anything?
Consult my handy folder. Okay. So our traffic is up from basically last month, because we hadn't blogged in a while, like nobody had really. So we had like one guy make one blog entry that was like, "Hi guys," and that was pretty much it.
Great.
I started reblogging like all the national normal stuff that I thought was relevant, the studies, you know. And so like on July 4th, July 5th, July 8th, the 20th, 22nd, and 24th, I did like a whole batch each of those days of normal studies and things. And then the traffic for the site, you know, by comparison, the traffic did go up quite a bit, because for the month of June, we had 599 sessions versus 1,145 sessions in July.
So we doubled our traffic.
Yeah. So basically, just by reblogging these things, because you know a lot of people, they're not going to the National Normal site, and they are looking at our site or subscribed. And our feed burner sends out emails every time we have new blog entries. And when people do click, and I forgot to print those, but people do kind of click sometimes on those feed burner emails, but they'll go right to our site too. But we basically almost doubled our traffic, and most of that was, you know, United States. There was a lot of Oshkosh, a lot of Chicago, but Chicago is usually like mobile users, it seems, like, you know, Verizon towers, who knows where they're from, but there was just a lot of Oshkosh and Appleton area users in our stats.
About how many hours do you think you spent? I mean, I know.
I did log it all, but I didn't write it down
okay.
first. But I probably spent about 10 hours in the normal site last month because I redesigned the layout, you know, the front page and everything. I cleaned up some of the old pages that had old stuff on it, and rearranged the layout.
So some of that time was not
made it
necessarily new
mobile-friendly.
content, but
but
gotcha.
making it mobile friendly, because I did notice in the stats that a significant portion of our users are mobile users. So when you start looking at the screen sizes of the users, they're like the 336 by whatever.
And I remember during the redesign.
At Herbie's Cannabis Seeds, we pride ourselves on bringing you the best quality seeds from the world's most respected cannabis seed producers, all at the lowest online prices. You can find Herbie's Seeds at herbiesheadshop.com. All cannabis seeds are sold as souvenirs and as a means of preserving cannabis genetics. Herbie's Seeds in no way intends to condone, promote, or incite the use of illegal or controlled substances. We strongly urge all prospective customers to check their national laws prior to placing an order. Herbie's Seeds at herbiesheadshop.com. Proud sponsors of the Russ Belville Show and 420 Radio.
I'm here with Diane Goldstein of LEAP. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much, Michael.
Now, LEAP, Law Enforcement Against Prohibition. If it sounds crazy because it almost sounds like police officers who support legalization, which would be crazy.
Well, no, it's not crazy. Our mission clearly states that drug prohibition, any drug prohibition, not just marijuana, has contributed to death, disease, and addiction in our communities. When we prohibit a substance, an illicit substance, what we've done is we've abdicated control to people who don't care about our communities. So the people who really are in charge of illicit drugs right now and marijuana in states where it's not controlled and regulated is criminals, cartels, drug trafficking organizations that have that don't have the best interest of our children at our heart or our communities at heart. They don't care about them.
So obviously, a group of people don't understand why law enforcement would support legalization. So you're making that argument. So where do you start?
Yeah, I usually start the conversation with a question. So what's working with the drug war? Are we reducing violent crime? Are we reducing burglaries and thefts and robberies? How about addiction? How's that working for you? I think there are some places in the states right now having a 300% increase in heroin overdose deaths. It's not working, all right? What's it costing us? And what are we getting from not just what we're spending in dollars, but well, what about human capital? Oh, we have mass incarceration. 2.3 million people behind bars now, and who knows how many million under the control of our parole and probation systems.
Let's be clear, LEAP does not advocate for our children to use or consume drugs, but what we also clearly advocate for is that the criminal justice system is much more detrimental to our children's future than if in fact they experimented with drugs. I'm not saying that they should, but today a conviction for any drug offense will ruin our children's lives. Good kids, bad kids, all our children make mistakes. And so why are we ruining our children's future in pursuit of an ideological goal that we're never going to achieve, which is establishing a drug-free America?
But the main reason, not just me, but many of my law enforcement counterparts are supporting this reform of ending drug prohibition is the violence. I'm from Baltimore.
Yep.
The past 3 months have been the most deadly over the past few decades in Baltimore. This last month of July, we had 45 homicides. We only have 620,000 people in our city.
Yep.
It's not going to improve until we end drug prohibition and we take the money, the power, the influence, and control away from our gangs and organized crime.
We're not fair, we're not balanced, and we're not even trying. Join us on Higher Ground.
420 Radio, your ticket to Seattle Hemp Fest. Hey everybody, it's Radical Russ here from 420 Radio, inviting you to be like me and get your ink done at Lucky Horseshoe Tattoo, Fort Worth's most female-friendly, clean, sterile, awesome tattoo shop. Thomas and his crew are true artists who can design you a custom piece or use a design you bring in. Lucky Horseshoe Tattoo also offers all styles of tattooing as well as piercings and all-around fun. In the DFW area, stop by Lucky Horseshoe Tattoo and tell them Radical Russ sent you. Trust me, it'll feel awesome.
Good evening. My name is Don Duncan, and you have joined us tonight for a live Google Hangout. The title tonight is The Truth About Medical Marijuana Regulations in California. Thank you so much for being a part of it. I'm broadcasting live tonight from Sacramento, California, from our Capitol office, with the support and help from our friends in Washington, D.C., the ASA staff there who's helping us with the technical side of this. So if you're joining us tonight on Google, we're going to have a time for your comments, your questions a little bit later in the broadcast. And so be sure you open the live chat option on the left-hand side of your screen. If you're watching on YouTube, you can still leave comments and questions, but those will not be broadcast live. So thanks again for being a part of this. It's really great to have all of you here tonight. Americans for Safe Access is the nation's leading medical cannabis patients advocacy organization. And you're talking tonight about the California Campaign for Safe Access. California is the oldest and perhaps largest medical cannabis state. There are probably more doctors, patients, and providers in this state than anywhere else. And so tonight we're going to be talking about medical cannabis regulations in the state of California. And California occupies a strange and unusual place when it comes to medical cannabis in the United States because we pioneered medical cannabis. We broke new ground back in 1996 with this, and yet we've kind of fallen behind when it comes to regulating the commercial provision of medical cannabis in the state of California. And so tonight we're going to be talking about where we are right now, where we're going, and why it matters with medical cannabis regulation. And I also want to talk to you about what is in some bills that we're going to talk about that are pending right now in the state legislature. If you've been following this this conversation online through our email discussion list or on our email announcement list, you know already that California is in the middle of the legislative process for this year. And I'm going to show you some web pages right now. These are some pages where you can go to get updates, to join that discussion list, or to keep tabs on the pending legislation. And right now we're at this really historic crossroads in California because the state legislature is finally moving forward on regulating medical cannabis in the state of California. And so it's time now for patients and for caregivers and for other folks who care about medical cannabis to be involved in that process. And so let me just make sure you guys are checking back in. There we go. Okay. And so let me talk to you a little bit about how we got to where we are right now. Voters in California approved Proposition 215 back in 1996. That was 19 years ago. And so Proposition 215 legalized medical cannabis, but it didn't really say anything about how you would get it if you don't grow up for yourself or you don't have a primary caregiver who grows it for you. And so almost immediately in California, an industry began to evolve to meet the needs of patients, to provide them with cannabis, to grow it, to process it, and provide it in their communities. And that industry existed in sort of a legal vacuum for a while. It wasn't until 12 years ago that the state legislature approved the Medical Marijuana Program Act, commonly known as SB 420. And the Medical Marijuana Program Act created some vague guidelines for medical cannabis in California. It created a voluntary ID card program. It dealt with some of the minutia about using medical cannabis on probation and other details like that. But most importantly, what the Medical Marijuana Program Act did is it created a system of collective and cooperative associations, cultivation associations that could also maintain storefronts to distribute medical cannabis to their members. And this was really a watershed moment in California. And up until this time, our model in California has been based on this collective and cooperative model that was sort of implied and outlined in the Medical Marijuana Program Act, but not specifically speaking regulated or flushed out in its details. And so for many years now, for the last 12 years, we've been operating in this quasi-gray zone, these collective and cooperative associations that are legal and have been upheld by the courts in California, but the details really haven't been established under state law. And so cities and counties in California have developed a whole patchwork of regulations or of bans of medical cannabis activity. We've seen in cities and counties, almost 200 of them have actually banned medical marijuana facilities. And more recently, we've seen cities and counties moving to ban the cultivation of medical cannabis. And in some really unfortunate situations, even the cultivation of personal use medical cannabis. That's individual patients or primary caregivers growing for the personal use of medical cannabis patients. And so this whole patchwork for the regulation of medical cannabis is increasingly untenable in California. All around the country right now, states have begun to develop and implement regulatory models that are based on licensing and regulation of medical cannabis. And California has really fallen behind. We're behind the curve on this situation. And so we really need to step up at this moment in time and make it real in California. And this is